Hi everyone, welcome back to Side 9. I'm Fulminatus.
And I'm Riella.
It's finally here, Gundam Card Game's 5th set, Freedom Ascension.
As you all know, the set is bringing a big shakeup to Gundam Card Game. New set with high card quality, the ban list officially in effect, and an absolute smattering of the most popular suits the franchise has ever seen.
Seriously, this format is the biggest change the game has seen since the first booster, which was, the beginning of Gundam Card Game.
As the game's first anniversary set, it should come to no surprise that we are returning to some of the game's most favorite characters and archetypes, introducing them to a new color and synergies all the while. Case in point, fans of Amuro, Char, Hiro, and Kira will all find homes in a new color. Since these are new card numbers, we now have access to the full 8-pilot package for the decks that want to pair them with the identity's previous color, allowing for easier ways to build a competitive deck out of the box if you're willing to immediately lock in the two necessary colors. Unlike Suletta, Riddy, and Elon, these are additional copies of pilots that are pretty dominant, so we'll see how doing more of that affects the game.
For those looking for something completely new, there's plenty this set is offering too. Between Mobile Fighter, Phantom Pain, and a fleshed out orb, the amount of ways you can play the game is expanding. Mobile Fighter is bringing a much needed boost to command pilots, allowing you to activate their effects and then pair afterwards. Phantom Pain introduces a new flavor of aggro focused on quick free deployment with forced discards for your opponent. Also, Orb is a tempo deck that focuses on maintaining its card count while adding in additional effects to keep their units slightly above rate as a reward for staying an archetype.
Alongside these new archetypes, we have some cool generics as well, the most notable being units that can attack rested enemy units the turn they are played.
The game is slowing down a bit when it comes to new mechanics, which is to be expected as we get further from its introduction. However, we still have a few in this set. Strike Freedom spins an opponent's unit to bottom of deck, New performs the damage step of combat without needing to swing, Master Gundam deals effect damage to a card in the shield area on swing, Gundam Calibarn gives a benefit when spending an EX resource on anything, as opposed to previous cards getting a bonus when spending an EX resource to play them. Finally, Interwoven Blessings is the first command that can destroy cards in the shield area, allowing you to deal damage without units.
These new mechanics are mostly interfacing with previous mechanics in the game, just in a slightly different way. At Side 9, we feel this is a good spot for the game to be in. We're glad Bandai is honing in on things that already exist, rather than having to change the design space to accommodate for new types of decks. This leads to a more sustainable game overall, which can speak for the upcoming longevity. I mean, who wouldn't want to play this game for a decade?
We hope you've enjoyed our coverage of the Gundam Card Game over the past year. As an anniversary gift, we'd appreciate it if you did us a solid by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. If you want to give a little extra support, please consider becoming one of our channel members like the Niners on screen. Here's to many more years of Gundam Card Game and Side 9.
But for now, it's truly a time to be living. Let's talk about the LRs from Gundam Card Game's 5th booster, Freedom Ascension.
So for our first LR, we have V2 Gundam, a blue, level 6 4 cost, 4/5 unit with repair 2, but most notably, the activate main, once per turn, rest 2 of your units, set this unit as active. I think a huge part of what makes this card really interesting is one, it's yet another relatively generic reactivation in blue between new, Tallgeese, Epion. Like, blue really seems to get most of our reactivating units, but this is one that A, is on a unit that has sustainability on its own in repair 2, and B, exists in an archetype that gives you plenty of units to rest to activate that effect.
Right, I think that's where most people's minds will immediately go when they take a look at a card that links with Uso and has Ligue Militaire in the trait. Okay, we're resting our parts tokens that typically are just for unit combat because they can't swing at the enemy player's shields. And of course, because this is a reactivating unit, we can then convert those cards that can't swing shields into a card that can swing shields, for example. So it allows you to buy a little bit more tempo, a little bit more action economy for whenever you may need it within the archetype specific.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. In archetype, we make the point that tokens can't swing shields, and this allows us to swing shields. But the other big advantage is that we have a much bigger unit. If we're linking Uso, this is a 6/6 unit. So we are converting what would be 1/1 swings into another 6/6 swing.
Yep, and with that repair too, it's not going to be taking as much damage in combat. If you're picking off 2 smaller things, for example, and you get the link, we have a solid 6 HP unit that can repair 2 at the end. So if you're able to take out some smaller things on the board, or even just one thing, and then going for the shield on the second swing, that repair 2 will keep this card in pretty good shape, and also Lord help the opponent if you get to restand with this card at any point.
Yeah, and speaking specifically to it as a Ligue Militaire unit, I do think it's worth noting that we do have some concerns. I mean, being a level 6, it's kind of occupying the same space as like V-Dash, which is already a really good card and does a lot of work for the archetype. And I feel like it's really going to be a play it by ear as to how many copies of this you'll be running as opposed to copies of V-Dash, right?
Right. It's good to get just the additional breach, and like that's something from V-Dash that just gives you the ability to target shields more often as well by having the breach on that, and also being able to set up your trades. So while both of them are individually really good cards, they are doing slightly different things. So my guess is that you're kind of going to go on like some 3-3-3-2 split between the two of them. But yeah, you bring up a really good point there. The fact that the level 6 slot in this deck has a little bit of competition. You kind of have to pick and choose.
Yeah. However, I do think it's absolutely worth noting, and I think a lot of people are underrating this aspect of the card. Nothing in this card requires it to stay in League Militaire.
Right, that's a good point for sure, and especially this is probably our, I don't want to say the easiest condition to activate when it comes to reactivation, but it's not that hard to do that, right? Of course, you do have to have some units that are previously set up. They aren't going to be as immediately obvious to be resting, so you may have to do a little bit of thinking before you get to reactivate this V2 Gundam, where it's just like, oh, do I want to rest, you know, a 2-2 or something, or maybe a low-end blocker if you want to play this in like blue-white or something. So there is more opportunity cost if you don't play it specifically in League Militaire, but you are gaining kind of the freedom to be able to just have a unit that reactivates itself. For 4 costs, mind you, this is really cheap for a card that is able to react.
Yeah, well, 4 costs for a 4/5 repair 2 is a pretty decent rate in and of itself. It then also has the ability to reactivate. And then also, due to the fact that it's not reliant on being linked or having a specific amount of archetype, as we've been saying, it also opens the door. This could be piloted by Akira to get 2 Kira activations. It could be piloted by a Green Amuro, so that way, if you have it fight twice in a turn, it's healing on both of those. You could just get more mileage out of your pilots. And then there's also, you know, soft synergy with at LR we're going to talk about soon in Strike Freedom. It's 2 Strike Freedom effect resolutions, so you're getting 2 cards off of that. There's just a lot that can be done with this card if you can find the space for it. So I think that this is a card that may not immediately shake up its archetype due to the fact there's competition in archetype, but I do think like going forward, like if we get another deck that's capable of just spamming out units, like this can add a lot of extension to that deck. I definitely think this is probably like a really good starting point for the power evaluation of this booster. I think this is kind of the floor for what we're going to consider a good card.
All right, next up we have the cover card, the reference card with Freedom and the booster name, Freedom Ascension. This is Strike Freedom Gundam. It is a level 8 6 cost with 5 AP, 6 HP. On deploy, you can select up to 2 units on the field, and it gets draw 1 when it kills an enemy card with battle damage. So this is basically anything. This could be a base, a shield, unit. And then its second ability is that when it is paired and attacking, you get to discard 2 cards to bottom deck an opponent's unit with the lowest level. So there's a lot of text here, a lot to break down. Of course, it also links with Akira Yamato. So basically what this card is doing in scenarios that it is working to its highest extent practicable is that you get the ability to refuel the cards that you are then using to then use its bottom deck effect. So we have a true control piece, level 8 no less, real big boy. And there's a lot of applications of this card, and we're going to be diving right into them during this section.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like the card that everybody's talking about the most when it comes to this booster. Several people are rating it as the best LR in the booster. I don't necessarily know that I personally agree with that, but in no way, shape, or form is this a bad card. This is a fantastic card, and I don't fault people for feeling like it's the best. It's a hilarious good control piece, and obviously there's the immediate synergy thinking of this gives you cards to draw, so that way you can pitch them away for its second effect. But, I mean, if you're ahead in the game, you don't have to resolve that second effect, at which point you're making a big Kira linked unit that's just giving you pluses.
Yeah, you're right. Getting the option to kind of opt in or opt out of whatever effect it is, of course, helps this card go a long way. There is that, of course, just immediate read. And I guess let's talk about, what this card does in totality, because we want to be linking this if possible. So let's talk about our pilots here. Of course, we have everyone's favorite, Side 9's favorite pilot, Akira Yamato White with the AP minus. So that's an option there. But we also have a new level 5 1 cost +2/+2 Hirayamato, which is basically just has the Banagher links ability. So when it links with an orb, you get to draw an extra card off that effect. So of course, you're getting a lot when this card immediately deploys. So you get the link, you can get the on attack ability, and of course the cards as brought up earlier. But what is also good to note is that there is some flexibility if you can't immediately go for the link play. It is a little bit slower, especially at the level that it's coming down, but thankfully there is flexibility with the cards that you can choose with its on deploy effect. So if for some reason you just had 2 units on the field previously, you can drop this down, choose those 2 other units to get the draw effect, and then if for some reason you're playing this in builds like Orb, for example, where you don't have the link necessarily, you can pair it on the following turn with something like Andrew Waldfeld to then activate those abilities. So thankfully, if you don't have the full play pattern, which hopefully you do by this point in the game given the level in which it's coming out, but there's still application for the card if you don't get the full scenario where you have the exact 2 cards that you need. And of course this card also kind of requires some other cards on your field to get the full ability off as well.
Yeah, and while not necessarily the worst case scenario, a relatively common low roll, so to speak, is this comes down on the board, you're not able to link it, and you only have one other unit, right? Well, even in that scenario, I mean, you're still developing a big unit, so you're not losing the card there because the unit stays on board, but the other unit now has the ability to get you to draw 1. So while not like the most use of this card's abilities, you're still getting a +1. If your bad case scenario is a +1, you're doing pretty good.
You're doing pretty good. And now, of course, I have to bring this up just because there's been a lot of discussion about just like the absolute nuts. Like, what if we can construct the best combo ever with this card? And of course, there's, the previous card that we talked about, V2 Gundam, but there's also Banshee Norn in white and Banshee Destroy in blue. That can make a really, really funny interaction where basically you put the draw 1 effect on a card that can reactivate and swing again. And of course, what happens when your card swings again? Well, you get to draw another card. Of course, Fulman and I think that this is a little bit of a win more scenario because, of course, if you have a scenario where you have, in the cases of both Banshees, a linked unit that is restanding itself, of course, you're kind of doing pretty well in your game already at that point. So, maybe the extra draws is a little bit overkill. V2 can be generic, so you can kind of just like slam that down. But while this is definitely an application of the card, Fulman and I have found in testing that this card just absolutely does enough by itself, synergizing with itself, that kind of going for those reactivation plays is a little bit more of a pie in the sky.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some unironic magical Christmas land discussions where we're talking about like targeting a linked Banshee Norn with the freedom effect and then having it kill 4 to 6 cards, thus drawing you 4 to 6 cards, which, while make no mistake, that is absolutely winning you the game. Your Norn destroying 4 to 6 cards without the freedom effect was already winning you the game.
Right. And I think with basically everything we've talked about, is it the best seller in the set? Probably not, but we are very confident in calling this card good.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most premier examples of what a good card in Gundam Card Game looks like.
We will have it up as an example for good cards in future videos, probably. Don't quote us on that.
All right, with the blue units done, it's on to the green ones, and oh boy, we have a good one for you, and I'm super excited about it because, a little foam fact, New Gundam is my favorite suit in the entire franchise. In reality, it's High New, but in the source material it's from, that's also the New, so New is still a close second. So, with New, we have a green level 7, 5 cost, 5/5 with Breach 5. A lot of 5s going on here. But the most important text on this card is that second when paired ability. You may choose 3 Londo Bell cards from your trash, exile them, and if you do, you choose 1 enemy unit, and then you skip to a battle straight between that unit and this unit, and only perform the damage step. Now, I've seen a lot of confusion about it. We made a post on Twitter. I've seen several judges in Discord clarify this. What this means is that these units are considered to be in battle, but an attack is not declared. So there is no action timing, so no action effects will fire. There are no on-attack triggers, nothing like that. Essentially, a Gundam just picks a thing and they deal damage to each other. That's just what happens immediately.
So I think to just go into this card real quick, I think this is kind of just a testament of its quality, but in the games that I played for testing of our deck list that you'll see later at the video, I just kept staring at the opponent's level. I kept looking at what level they were at, how many resources / EX resources they had, and that is something that doesn't happen super often, because we're focusing on other things throughout the game, and of course, there's just a multitude of plays for the opponent to make. But as soon as we're back in like set 1, set 2 wing territory, where we're just asking the opponent how many resources you got, how close are you to level 8, basically the same question here, but seeing them go to level 7. I think if you're constantly worried about that, I think that probably shows a thing or two about the quality of this card overall. And that's just something that I can't get out of my mind when playing against a deck that is Londo Bell.
I think it is not a stretch to say that this is, at the very least individually, the scariest LR of this entire set, and it's not particularly close. The amount of reach this gives to a deck running Londo Bell cards, the fact that like you may just immediately lose the game when they hit level 7 because it just kills 2 things, takes 2 shields, and oftentimes still presents you a unit that you have to deal with on a later turn that still has breach 5, so if you let it go sideways again, it's just going to kill a 3rd card, and suddenly you're getting like 3 for 2 and 3 shields. That is backbreaking, and that makes this card horrifying. And I cannot understate how important that link text is. Blue Amuro is a good card. Green Amuro, being a level 5, 1 cost, 2/2 that says heal 2 when you win a fight, is a really good card, especially on a card like this. So having access to some of the best pilots in the game with this effect stapled to it, it just makes this card horrifying to sit across from.
I think there's one core thing about this card that just prevents it from being absolutely busted, and it's really just kind of 3 words that are in the first sentence of the win paired ability there. It says you have to choose 3 Londo Bell cards. Would you say that the archetype of Londo Bell is holding back this card from just being absolutely busted?
It's hard to say strictly the idea that Londo Bell is holding this card back. However, it is inexorably linked to Londo Bell. Like, we wouldn't be playing Londo Bell cards if we weren't playing this card, right? But the Londo Bell cards themselves aren't like terrible. We're not like playing cards that are just so below rate. We would probably choose to play other cards instead if we could get away with it. So in a way, yeah, this card is limited by the fact that you have to stick to its archetype. You now have to run, a pretty broad green package. And in the future, potentially, if we don't get better Londo Bell cards, like this card scales pretty hard, but the deck it has to run in could be full of cards that start weighing you down, and this card's relevance starts to slip. That is absolutely a scenario that could happen, but at the very least for this format, I mean, I don't feel particularly punished running Londo Bell cards, especially when it converts into this.
Right, and I think the good news as well is that, suppose in a few sets from now, if this deck starts slipping from relevance a little bit, New Gundam does not need to be crept. What they need to do is just print more quality and quantity of Londo Bell units. So that would be the fix for this archetype, which we probably will see in the game at some point, whether it's sooner or later, 3, 4, 5 sets from now, we don't know. But, there is space for this card to still exist, because this card probably won't get crept anytime soon. Fingers crossed, who knows, right? It's a scary world out there, but...
This is absolutely the last card that I want to see crept. Like, if next booster we get something that's doing something like this, but even better, that just kind of sets the tone. Gundam has been a game of very, very slow creep over time, and if we're just immediately creeping this card, then slow creep is out the window. We're now back in like what is a standard card game level of creep, where you just got to buy everything out of the new booster, every booster that comes out.
Yeah. One thing that's like particularly scary about this card too is that even though it already has activated its win paired effect to do its thing and breach, as the opponent sitting across from New Gundam, the Amuro heals, and then you kind of just want to do everything in your power to still deal with it, even though the scariest part of the win paired effect has already happened, because it's just still a big unit that breaches 5, so it's going to keep on doing that until the end of the game. So it's a little bit of a lightning rod in terms of removal, but it's spooky because it's a lightning rod that's already cashed in most of its benefit, and yet you as the opponent still want to try to kill it.
Yeah, and a huge part that comes up all the time when playing this card, especially, for example, if you're playing this outside of blue-green, like if you're playing white-green with this, which, by the way, Londo Bell can pair off with basically any off color you want, it still works. But even if you're pairing off with those off colors, the win paired being a win paired is actually extremely relevant, because sure, if you don't link it, you don't get to double strike in the turn, but you could absolutely still get 2 hits out of this. Like if you manage to play it and it lives a turn, then you just throw like a hero on it, right? And it hits in the main phase, and then you turn it sideways again.
It's just truly the gift that keeps on giving.
And like I said, if I had to point to any specific weaknesses of this card, because we've talked up a lot and it is a very scary card. However, there are 2 things that distinctly keep it kind of in the realm of feasibility. And as we mentioned, the Londo Bell archetype isn't that scary as an archetype, so it's not like they're like getting really ahead of you early in the game and then New comes down and seals it out. No, New itself is the big swinging point. But having to specifically have 3 Londo Bell cards in your trash, there are games where you won't have enough in trash, but the other important thing is because it exiles them, you can run into scenarios where it becomes difficult to resolve multiple copies of this card.
All right, how are you feeling with this card when it comes to the rating, given all we've said about it?
I think we would have riots on our hands if I gave this anything less than a good rating. This is an incredibly good card. Normally, a card being archetype locked would have me say, oh, it's a playable card because being archetype locked just kind of is innately a debuff, but the upside to this card is so good and this card is so scary that even in spite of being an archetype card, this is a good card.
It's pretty sick. Cool card.
Yeah, I think with New Gundam at the helm, a Londo Bell based deck potentially becomes the deck to beat in the next format. I have the soft prediction that we're largely going to see this become the new Tier 1 deck.
All right, next up, oh wait, holy crap, there's another green LR in this set. Oh my gosh, this card seems like a lot of people may be overlooking, but yeah, tell us about Gundam Calibarn.
Okay, so normally we don't like doing 2 cards in a row, but to be nice to Riala, because he's going to have to cover 2 cards at the same time in a moment, I'm taking on Gundam Calibarn, which works just fine for me, because this level 8, 7-cost green unit that is a 7/5 has one of the most unique effects in the game, and I will make this deck into a scary meta contender if it's the last thing I do, because the line of text, when one of your EX resources is exiled from the game, you may choose one of your units during this turn. When it receives enemy damage, reduce it by 3, is a crazy line of text. And where do we get those EX resources? Well, when it's deployed, it gives you 3, so Calibarn's taking care of that itself. A permanent 3 reduction is crazy. So this means that if you have something that could fight multiple times, every time it takes damage, it's reduced by 3. This is silver bullets specifically affect damage reduction, just stapled to whatever unit you have when you spend an EX resource. Like, the amount of value that you could get out of this one card is genuinely crazy.
And that's going to be exactly what we're looking for, given that this is a level 8, 7 cost. So, at this range, we kind of see cards that when linked do this like huge tempo swing, but of course Calibarn is, I don't want to say held back, but it is different from those other cards that, like Strike Freedom, like, something like Epion, even like just those high-end units at level 8, that this is something that comes down and then wants you to be performing other game actions to then cash in the value of this card. But I mean, the fact that you get those 3 EX resources to then go do that, I think is the saving grace of this card for sure.
Yeah, and I think the biggest advantage it has, as compared to a lot of other cards, we were just talking about Strike Freedom, New Gundam, these are big flashy things that you commit a lot of your deck to make these things function. Calibarn is less so. Calibarn is significantly more generic, where it's a level 8 unit that you can just have hit the board and then you go on doing what you were doing, now just abusing the fact that anytime you commit an EX resource, you give damage mitigation. And this winds up stacking up incredibly well with a lot of other effects, because if you activate an unforeseen incident at action timing while your opponent's attacking, well, not only is the unit being fought taking 3 less damage, but you got -3 AP. A -6 AP swing is genuinely backbreaking. This is where, the free resell take is now your unit just got absolutely owned, right?
Yep. It turns a card that is 3 AP into something double as much. It can create some crazy tempo swings. And I think that's another great aspect about this card as well, because less talking about just the overall card quality, which, is very strong, don't get us wrong. But it's just something that opens the door for just building some cool decks, man. And like, trust me, given the fact that we make a deck list video every set for every booster, we like building some cool decks, man.
Yeah, and I think that's really where Calibarn will shine, is just any deck that looks at this more generic effect and goes, yeah, I want to get that repeated value. That's what I'm about. That's what's really gonna excel. Again, as we were talking about, we mentioned this with Strike Freedom, but Strike Freedom is Strike Freedom. The level 8 tax is real. Being able to get to level 8 immediately makes your deck consideration of like, how do I live long enough? Because yes, we no longer have the absolute tide of 2/1/2/2s beating decks down, but plenty of decks are still willing to ARG 78 you to death before you get to level 8. So you have to have a plan to get there, and then most level 8 units are very high impact. They hit the board, they influence the game immediately, and Calibarn doesn't do that. It asks you to play more cards. It gives you the ability to play more cards, but you have to have those cards. So those are definitely negatives on Calibarn's side. But again, the value ceiling here is insane.
It's just, again, like just thinking about all of the different things that you could be doing with this card, I think could kind of just send people's heads into a spin. And given spoiler that we didn't quite brew a deck for Calibarn in this video, I think the gears are still turning for both of us, and more time spent looking at the card list will just kind of unfold and give us some like more and more ideas about what this card can really do and where it can go. I think the floor is still open about even what color we can pair this with too. Like, I don't want to rule out any particular color pair just yet with this card.
Yeah, like from testing, this is an Academy unit. I still maintain that Academy is poop from a butt, and so it being the head of like an Academy deck wasn't really working out. Something that was really, really good in testing, although getting it to execute consistently was a problem, is pairing this with like an Age 2, because the Age archetype gives us EX resources to continue spending. It ramps us into this, and then Age 2's taunt effect allows you to spend an EX resource, give it that permanent damage reduction, and then it just tanks combat through. And so it can force your opponent into a position where they have to figure out a way to deal either with your Age or your Calibarn without using combat to handle the problem, and that could be very compelling.
That's not very many cards in Gundam Card Game. So that's an immediate synergy even within the color too.
And so with all of that, the sheer potential of Calibarn and the value represented in the card itself, even though I haven't quite cracked what deck it ultimately finds a home in, I would be wildly uncomfortable giving this anything less than like, maybe even the bottom end, but anything less than a good rating.
All right, so we have our first LR pilot in the game. So we're going to be talking about 2 LRs for the price of 1 in this section. But we're going to be talking about what is ostensibly the top end to a mobile fighter deck, MF deck, Master Gundam, and Master Asia, its pilot. Master Gundam is a level 7 5 cost that on attack you can choose 2 special moves from your trash. You get to exile them, and then you get to deal 5 damage to the first card in the opponent's shield area. So this can be a base, and this could just be a shield if they have no base. And of course, your combat is going to be going through afterwards. So this effectively represents something like suppression, but can play around the base a little bit better if they have a 5 HP base in play. So that's Master Gundam. Let's talk about the pilot as well before we get into further commentary about it. It's a level 6 1-cost pilot with +2/+2. It has the burst add to hand ability. However, if there are 3 or more MF cards in your trash, you can deploy Master Asia the card as a unit, which has AP3, HP3. Alongside that, if it is paired or linked to a unit, it says during link on attack, if you have activated a special move commands card, main or action during this turn, you get to choose an enemy unit and deal 2 damage to it. So that's a lot of stuff, especially because Master Asia just has this ability where you can play it as a unit if you burst it out of shields. Of course, that isn't really something in like the main play pattern, but it's a little bit extra stuff that this card can do. But overall, the main play pattern here is you get to deal some extra damage to shields, do this quasi-suppression thing. You need to have played a special move at some point during the turn to get that extra ping 2. So most of the time you're going to be pairing this with something like Darkness Finger, which is ping 2. If you have Master Gundam on your field, draw 1. So eventually you get this whole Rube Goldberg machine going where you get to get some pings, you get to suppress the opponent's shield, and Mobile Fighter has a top-end unit.
I do think another really big point to mention, just because I have caught a few people with this in testing because they don't really think about it, due to the fact that the effect is not strictly suppression, it does do this funny thing where if you are on one shield left, Master Gundam just kills you.
Yep, that does indeed happen, so there are several cases where this is better than suppression. Unfortunately, if the opponent has a 6 HP base, there's, not really much that can be done. So, I mean, that's, a clear weakness, of the card. So all of this on paper reads like something that's really, like you read all these effects and you see that there's a clear direction that these cards are going. You get to resolve abilities, Master Asia, has some modality as, having abilities at many different points in the game, of course, including the Link as well. So you can see that these effects are moving in a very clear direction. I think what's a little bit awkward are a few things about the card. So the fact that you want the 3 cards to execute the full play pattern, that's not just something that is present in Master Gundam and Master Asia. This is kind of something that you see throughout the entire Mobile Fighter archetype. But also the fact that you are exiling special move commands from your trash that then lowers the pool for special moves that you can grab back with your LR Shining Gundam that we'll talk about a bit later. So that can be a little bit of a non-bow. And so given that, these like inconveniences that the play pattern is actually giving us, Master Gundam ends up in this weird spot where it's like, okay, well, we're in Mobile Fighter, we want to be playing special move commands anyway, so you kind of like chuck them in your deck, but it's not necessarily the thing that we're most happy to be playing in Mobile Fighter, because I think the clear draw to that deck are some of the more white focused combos such as Shining Gundam and Gundam Maxter.
Now, having said that, Darkness Finger is absolutely one of the better special moves.
Yes, it absolutely is. Having that ping 2, of course, just helps round out your math. Any low end stuff that's struggling earlier in the game, you can just have that Darkness Finger going and being able to just clear out different things. Of course, we have the added benefit later on in the game to get that extra card back. So, like, again, your things are doing stuff. It's just kind of like the best role player we have to round out the game. And one thing that we found in testing as well when playing Mobile Fighter is that because a lot of our combos earlier in the game are focused on just kind of 1v1ing, so we have Maxter that goes AP -2 with Cyclone Punch several times after you activate its main effect again with Maxter. So you can 1v1 something, Shining Finger does First Strike. And so basically, you end up in these game states where you cleanly and efficiently deal with their board once, but once they rebuild that board, your cards kind of have to go on a solo mission, on a side quest to start attacking shields, because otherwise, of course, we're playing a deck with a lot of commands, quite a few pilots as well, standard amount of pilots. So, of course, once the card kind of does the gimmick and it's just kind of sitting there, you then have to make sure that they're going on that quest to start swinging at shields. Otherwise, we are going to be in for a bad time in the late game where we inevitably end up with bad variants at some point with our draw steps and just ending up with their units without the command pilots that we want with them, or the vice versa. And so thankfully Master Gundam is filling in this gap that, if they deal with our card after we get to do our cool special move combo with it, once those get dealt with, Master Gundam is finally going like, okay, fine, I guess I'll make some work of the remaining shields because, we gotta win this game somehow.
Yeah, I think that's also just like what is one of the biggest pain points with running Master Gundam, and to a lesser extent Master Asia, is the whole point of at the extremes, it's a very difficult card to play. Like if everything is going right with the deck, you don't have special moves to exile because they're all sitting on your units right now. And if nothing is going right and you need a card to get you back in the game, well, this card pressures shield as opposed to fighting for board, so it's not particularly good at that anyway. But also, you haven't played enough of your stuff to resolve its effects anyway.
Right. So there's several layers in which things can go wrong. But, it's, like I said, it fills in the gap. It does what you need to be doing at the level in which it's coming down. So because of all of that and thinking about it, I think this card kind of has to end up with the niche rating. It's a card that we wouldn't really, even if it were generic, we wouldn't really consider playing it in other decks particularly, just because there's strong suppression available within red and white. Now apparently there's a lot of suppression stuff in white coming out of this set in previously. So it's like, that's kind of where the card has to land. It's reasonable in the mobile fighter archetype, and of course that's the deck where the card literally says you have to be exiling special move commands with it. So that's where it's going to end up, but given its downsides, it's a slightly rough inclusion as a top end to a mobile fighter deck. All right, so here we have a little bit of a surprise. This only basically got revealed the day before we got the ban list announcement, which was going to be on the 10th. I believe this card was revealed on the 9th, and then of course we finally got that full set list on the 10th. This is Guy Gundam. This is the start of a new archetype in GDO5 Phantom Pain, and reading its effect will kind of give you some ideas about what this archetype is trying to do. So it's a level 3, 2 cost with 3 AP and 3 HP. During pair, when this unit destroys an enemy shield area card with battle damage, the enemy player may discard 1. If they don't discard with this effect, you can deploy a Phantom Pain unit card that is level 4 or lower from your hand. And of course, typically if you would have to pay its cost in this card game, it would say you have to pay its cost, and this one doesn't, so you just get to deploy it for free. So you do give the opponent a clear decision point about, what is presumably better for them. It's like, okay, am I going to take the discard, or do I get to deploy a Phantom Pain unit card? So that, they get kind of a decision point there, but this kind of gives us the template for the rest of the Phantom Pain archetype. You're going to be playing cards that make the opponent discard, and then you get to play out some dudes onto the field, an extra dude on the field, and they all have, kind of a range of effects.
Yeah, and of course, sometimes you just put your opponent in that terrible scenario where they go, okay, I won't discard, so you get to play something for free. And then you just play the Abyss Gundam in May mode and pair it and make them discard anyway.
Yep. So there's a little bit of extra discard. Outside of that, let's talk a little bit about the Phantom Pain unit cards that we can deploy. Because of course we can't evaluate Guy Gundam just by itself, because there are scenarios where you get to, kind of deploy things. But basically, we have Legao that is linkable and has an extra HP. So Legao is just getting straight up crept here. We have a 4/2 unit that allows you to enable high maneuver. We have a 1 cost Rizel that is typically is normally 3 costs, but allows you to get minus costs given the opponent discards. We have a 3/3 that makes the opponent discard when it's paired, like Foam just mentioned. And then, there's just a lot of options, right? And then given what information about what the opponent is on, I'm sure that there's exactly a best target that you want to have, but typically I think you're pretty happy just kind of deploying anything and just, letting Jesus take the wheel a little bit.
Yeah, well, a huge part of what made previous formats 2-1-2-2 spam so strong was the speed at which they could get units out. Being 1 cost, shields only have 1 HP, so just being able to increase your volume of attacks available to you is kind of what really made those so oppressive. And we have an archetype that's replicating that, except instead of dropping 2-1-2-2s, we're dropping a bunch of Rizel stat lines.
Yep, so, we're moving a little bit away from 2-1-2-2 stat lines, and then here's, a fast deck that allows you to do it. Of course, in order for Guy Gundam to get its effect, it needs to be during pair. Of course, the best target for the pair is actually the Link, which is Stellar. So is a level 3 1 cost pilot with +2/+0, and then of course when the unit it's attached to is destroyed, you get to look at the top card of your deck, and then if it's Phantom Pain, you can reveal it and add it to your hand. And of course this includes your pilots and then also your base that you're playing. So given the deck list and making sure that you're building around as many Phantom Pains as possible, the Hybrid Geo is looking pretty good on that. But outside of that, being a +2 AP +0 HP pilot allows you to also deal with 5 HP bases, which for a level 3 2 cost Link that costs 3 in total given the Link, that's a pretty sweet spot to be in, to just have a base slayer at that low cost.
Yeah, especially since its effect requires you to destroy a shield area card. It would really suck to get walled from that just because your opponent played base.
Yep. And then of course there are going to be some decks that don't really care about having to discard a card, right? So suppose there's, some more slow and grindy control decks that, can recoup their value in the late game. I'm thinking decks that can happily play a Show of Resolve, or, have this cool Strike Freedom line later in the game where, it's because it's slow and accumulates value and, gets 2-for-1s later in the game. It's okay discarding a card. But they still have to deal with, just your velocity. And of course, if they discard a card, you're not deploying that card for free, but I mean, you can still, play your cards by paying the resource costs for them. So if they're in a deck that is okay with discarding the card anyway, they're still possibly in for some trouble because you're playing down 2 costs and 3 costs that will eventually just overwhelm the opponent if they don't do things to actively stop you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from playing a deck like this, is just the whole idea of even if things aren't going perfectly, because almost everything in your deck is in the same band of like levels versus costs, we have that similar thing of previous aggro decks where anything you top deck is generally just going to be something that you can play. And so you really just need some of the deck to go right, and the deck just does its thing from there.
Right. And of course, that's not even to talk about the complete, high roll scenarios as well. Like, obviously, there are some games where you just get this early link. Obviously, I think the best scenario is just getting as many Gaia Gundams as possible and just, vomiting your hand onto the board. That's not super realistic, though. But given the fact that you have other pilots and links, it's just like being able to mulligan for just a link, whether it be Gaia Gundam or not, just sets you up for this cool strategy where you get to link a thing basically every turn. If you want to pair this with White, which, spoiler, our deck list later on will pair it with White. So we can play full playsets of both of the cantrips, both Overflowing Affection and Airframe Seizure, which of course end up being really solid cards in a deck that wants to be getting its links, basically linking to any unit that you play so it can attack the turn it's played. Of course, one thing that this deck makes up for when compared to the old 2-1-2-2 decks of old when it comes to velocity is that, okay, well, while we may not be deploying as many bodies as fast as those old decks used to, this one, at least we're getting to be able to swing the turn that our units are played. And so, while in terms of just like straight velocity, we don't have the same amount of velocity, we do get to be able to do a different kind of velocity, which is swinging the shield. So it kind of averages out to being similar in the end, even though this deck is slightly slower.
Well, even then, in a lot of scenarios, if you're able to get your Gaia Gundam to connect, or we're to that point, we're starting to hit that level 6 range, then you have an equal level of velocity because your cards are cheap and or free.
Right. There's a lot of ways for this can go right. I think it's kind of funny to evaluate this card being a negative, but like if we were to really pinpoint a negative of Phantom Pain is that it's not even close. The best thing you can be doing at level 3 is playing this Gaia Gundam and linking it. And for an archetype to be reliant on its best play to be on a specific unit and pilot, and at even a full level earlier than a lot of our flagship LRs in the game that happen at level 4, that can be to the deck's detriment a little bit because obviously we can't account for just the high roll scenario every game. So it's a little bit ironic calling Gaia Gundam's biggest weakness the fact that we want to see it every game a weakness. But, given the fact that the rest of the archetype is pretty vanilla, of course there's effects on those cards, but they aren't doing the whole cake and eating it too that Gaia Gundam's giving you if you manage to link it on curve. So that is to the overall deck's detriment.
Yeah, I think the best way to contextualize it is there's plenty of games that you'll win where you just never see your Gaia Gundam because just playing this aggressive archetype. For example, if you see enough Gaia Gundam MA modes and you forced a discard off of an Abyss Gundam MA mode, you just dropped a bunch of Rezells for 1 each. Like, that just winds up being pretty backbreaking if it happens at the right turn. The biggest weakness of Gaia Gundam is it just doesn't scale. Like, when you see Gaia Gundam late in the game, it's just not a scary unit. At that point, your opponent is like, sure, I'll let you drop another level 3 unit for free. At this point, I don't care.
Right. It's something that is definitely best in the early game. And of course, there's plenty of anti-blocker synergy that we have as well, including the base within this archetype. So yeah, we're definitely on some good fundamentals here. And this might be, kind of what is the new aggro type of deck in the new format as well. I was this close to giving this card a good rating, but I think given the slight shortcomings and the need to see it basically as early as possible, I'm giving this card a strong playable. But it is, like I just said, a strong playable. This is not towards the middle or lower end of playable. It's high up there.
This is interesting because we're introducing the sub-archetype of Neo Zeon to purple with our level 7, 5-cost, 5/5 Perpy Boy, which is funny because he's actually a red boy. But he has a very important line of text on him that we love seeing on our level 7 purple units since Gundam X, and that is he just has baseline suppression. Sazabi goes sideways at shields, he's taken 2 of them. But the really interesting part of this card, and what makes it the LR worth considering and potentially the build around, is the second line of text where on attack, you choose one of your units, you destroy it, and if you do, all enemy players, inbuilt multiplayer scaling, choose one of their non-battling units and destroy them. So before they even get a chance to turn a blocker sideways, you may potentially be able to look at them and be like, nah, you just kill it.
Which is quite the thing to have on a suppression unit, huh?
Yeah, that's really scary for a card you don't want going at shields. Now, obviously, this does come with the downside of, well, you're forcing your opponent into a 1-for-1. Now, you can kill one of your units that's of lower value, and if you set your opponent up correctly, they're now killing one of their units of higher value. But at the end of the day, this is just an even effect. So how do we mitigate that? Well, we'll go ahead and spoil it now. We have a new card in the booster, Case's Jagdoga, which importantly has the line of when it's destroyed by the effect of one of your Neo Zeon units, you put it back into your hand. So cool, you don't minus, you just lose the resources you spent to play the unit. That turns this to, okay, so Sazabi just gets to kill something every turn on your opponent's board.
Right, and then also given the board state, yes, you are getting rid of the resources you spent to play the Jagdoga, but you get to swing with it, ostensibly, if it had existed on the field prior, so you get to get that little action out of the card before you have to sack it, and of course it comes back to hand. So I love these types of abilities that appear symmetrical at first, but then of course we remember that we are part of archetypes that are designed and developed for, and we go, oh wait, these symmetrical abilities within the archetype, we have ways to actually turn this into a benefit for us and just a downside for the opponent, and that's exactly what's happening here with Sazabi.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to think about it is Sazabi on its own, like, yes, it's a scary unit because it has that inbuilt suppression and it has a destruction effect on it. So yeah, that's pretty scary in and of itself. We've spent a bunch of time gassing up Double X for doing stuff like that. But when we think about it as a piece in a greater package between it, again, Case's Jagdoga, the new base Neo Zeons getting an Axis, and then finally our new copy of Purple Char. As a whole package, we now represent repeatedly playing bases, playing the unit that got destroyed again for free, and not going negative when we blow up our own cards. This just winds up being like an insane amount of value that once you get all 4 of these cards in circulation, like Sazabi literally can just crush your opponent out of the game because they just can't keep up with the value.
Right, and of course, that's something that requires a little bit of setup to get going. So could you elaborate a little bit more on just, how consistent this sort of type of effect is, just because it's something that, prefers to be linked. Your pilot gets back the Axis, but you want to have something on the field prior. And of course, sometimes the opponent can play around this type of effect by just slamming down their archetype 2-1-2-2 to make sure that that's the one that they choose with Sazabi's ability. So tell me a little bit more about just kind of like the realistic, I guess, play space for this card outside of like the big bombastic high rolls.
So it definitely is the case where like sometimes we run into consistency issues. Again, I'm talking about having 4 cards in circulation. That doesn't always happen in Gundam Card Game. It generally tends to work if you only have 3 of these cards in play. Obviously, it tends to turn off other resultant effects, but we could still manage, again, basically primarily as long as you have your QJD out in play. So your Sazabi can pop that and you don't wind up going negative on your own cards. That can sometimes just be enough to really push your opponent around in a game. And so when it comes to consistency issues, the floor is obviously pretty terrible because if you don't have any of the consistency pieces, Sazabi struggles to do a lot on its own. It's constantly shooting one of your own units, and you're in oftentimes archetypes that struggle to make more card advantage. So when your opponent plays a Show of Resolve, they could just afford to blow up more of your own units. However, it tempers this with the average level is still very good, and then obviously if we get closer to its ceiling, now it's insane. And then this largely depends on the colors that you pair Sazabi with, but one of the big deals, a huge part of the reason why like a red-purple Sazabi deck has a lot of merit to it is you get to play around your opponent attempting to play around you. When they develop their in-archetype 2-1-2-2 to try to fade Sazabi's destruction effect, you go, okay, cool, let me just darkness finger that really quick, and now your big unit that you're trying to protect is vulnerable
the units
again.
that you still have on board. So yeah, this is a card that definitely gets, the gears turning in the head, thinking about all the different lines and types of scenarios where Sazabi can end up in. But, the good news is that the absolute worst case, of course, when Sazabi is by itself, is pretty bad. But basically any other type of scenario is at least acceptable. And as we climb up in terms of the high roll, so to speak, we go from bad to acceptable to good to like really, really good. Like there's several blowout scenarios with this card. And I think that range of what this card can do is what makes it genuinely pretty compelling.
Yeah, and then similar to its rival New Gundam, that link text that says Char Azdable winds up just being absolutely nutty because there are now 3 different Chars in the game. You have OG Zeon Green Char, we have new purple Neo Zeon Char, and then a Char that a lot of people forget, we have white Quattro Pagina, whose name is Char. So that means that immediately, if you wanted to just simply play 8 Char links, you have 2 off colors that are immediately available to you in green and white. And so that means that Sazabi has access to multiple decks. Of course, another huge part of this and a huge reason to consider green is pairing it with the OG Char Azdable just means that, hey, I have a 7/6 high Mo suppression unit. So I'm just going to start killing shields now.
Part of this card, and I was playing against the green-purple deck most prominently in my practice games that were happening when making the deck lists, and yeah, the deck's pretty scary just because of the velocity that it can field units in the early game, and then it kind of just wants to have the suppression for those last couple of shields, but then because it plays Zaku 2 and Char Zaku 2 and just these low-end units where you don't really mind that much if they get destroyed, there's like extra application to something that just is a big boy suppression otherwise.
It's interesting because, again, there are just so many parallels to New Gundam with this card, fitting since they're rival suits from the same piece of media. But whereas New Gundam is locked to its archetype by strict name because it specifically needs Londo Bell units, Sazabi, to an extent, is also locked to an archetype, but as opposed to that being an archetype with a specific trait name, it needs to exist in a deck that can both feed it for destroying units and getting benefit further from destroying them, so, having when destroyed effects. And so, with that, given those constraints, the fact that it is a little less scary on its top end, especially when we're just getting 1 or 2 cards in circulation as opposed to the full package of all 4 synergy pieces with Sazabi, I think unlike New Gundam, that slightly does downgrade it from good to playable, and that's just the niche that it carves out. Basically, by definition, forces it down there. It pains me to put it there because I feel like if you see that playable rating as compared to a good rating, you're going to underestimate just how scary this card is. This is a really, really good card, absolutely worth building around. It is basically knocked from good to playable on technicalities.
And being knocked down on technicalities is not a bad place to be in at all. So, yeah, welcome to the playable rating, Sazabi. Honorary good, I guess we can call it if you want to. All right, here we have a Gundam Exia Repair, and let's talk about just, designing cards and how they're costed, because on a first read, this is something that reads pretty crazy, okay? So we got a level 2 1 cost with 2 AP, 1 HP, so basically we are giving up 1 HP from a traditional 2-1-2-2 to get a Setsuna Fusei link and 2 abilities. So the first one is that when it deals battle damage to an enemy unit that is level 4 or lower that has no paired pilot, you get to destroy that enemy unit. And then when it is destroyed, you place the top 2 cards of deck into your trash. The most important ability here, including the link as well, is just the kind of death touch ability. So dealing damage to an enemy unit that is level 4 or lower. So of course this is dealing with things as big as unpaired, Gundam RX-78s. If for some reason blockers are rested or you're swinging at shield with the opponent unit having a blocker on the field, they can't safely block that without just accepting the fact that it's going to be a trade on the opponent's side of the field. And of course, there are several decks in this game that care about the cards in your trash. The first 2 that come to mind are, of course, anything in the game that plays with purple CB, so that's, the archetype that this is from, and then of course Minerva Squad and Vulture care about the trash as well, so there's like a little bit of application there as well, but for the most part the Mill 2 aspect is pretty negligible. But yeah, overall there's not a whole lot to talk about here. We have something that is, at the same level in cost as a 2-1-2-2. It has added abilities, gun tanks, there's no 8 gun tank in this format, and then of course, Ping Pilot has been choice restriction, Ansh is gone. So we're presumably going to be seeing less Tekkadan this format as well, although we'll still probably see plenty of red ping as well. So it's a little bit vulnerable in that regard, but given the fact that we're seeing less pings, this seems to be a pretty good statted unit that you can field earlier in the game, rather.
I think this is potentially one of the most overrated LRs. Now, I realize that sounds like fighting words. This is still an incredibly good card. This is a level 2 1 cost that has additional text. That in and of itself pushes it into a class of being a pretty decent card. But I think a lot of people are thinking about this in the context of the last meta as opposed to the upcoming meta. And one thing that we're seeing with the game slowing down and the need to regain tempo is, one, obviously it's vulnerable to things like gun tank. Sure, we don't have blue-purple aggro with its 1,000,001 pings going around to deal with it. However, on the flip side of that, we are also going into a meta where more and more decks are more than happy to incorporate level 3 pilots. And since we're incorporating level 3 pilots, the odds are that your opponent has a level 3 link unit to deal with this becomes much higher. That doesn't discount the threat that this presents. Like, again, this is a level 2 1 cost that trades with your Rizels. It immediately clears out Lifrits. Like, that is to be respected. I just think that a lot of people in their evaluations are treating this as though this is the next just immediately windmill slam it in any purple deck ever. And I'm like, probably has a little bit more meta consideration than that before we just throw 4 copies in.
Right, and it's so funny too to kind of rubber band this back to my first point that I made when introducing the card, is that from a pure just how much text can we cram onto a card, trading the 1 HP for a link and 2 abilities actually just sounds nuts. But the problem is that you have to look under the hood a little bit more and just see what's actually going on. Yes, the fact that you can kill the level 4 or lowers is good. It's not as prevalent as you would think, especially when comparing it immediately to the last format where you can play decks against decks that basically only have level 4 or lower units as well. But, given the fact that it's an early drop, with marginal effect and marginal upside, and then also some good just timings to be able to get that Death Touch ability, I think, decks that want to go lower curve still are going to be happy playing this card. It's just, it has to find the right deck to do it. Anything that's like still trying to play aggressively can definitely play this. I think CB definitely wants to play this because, Lord knows purple CBs is just looking for some playables to fill out their deck list. But yeah, this is, as Fulm adequately pointed out, this is not something that you immediately slam into a purple deck. It's something that you have to have fit well within your overall game plan, in addition to just being a good low drop.
You don't have to carve out that much space for it. There are plenty of decks that can absolutely just be like, yes, this is a card that I want to play. It's just, I don't think the starting point is I'm in a purple deck, I'm putting 4 of these in there, so much as there are just a lot of purple decks that would play this.
Yep. Very key, a slight difference there, a slight distinction there, but a very important one, I think. So, given everything that we've talked about this card, this one is a short and sweet section because it is a very simple ability. But yeah, we definitely think this card is playable. It's not unequivocally good, but, given, as Fulm just pointed out, there's several decks that would want to play this. It feels exactly right to be in the playable rating.
Alright, with that, I don't want to poison the well immediately out, but I just have to be honest. Probably the biggest disappointment in the LRs from this entire booster, we have Iron-Blooded Orphan's latest version of Gundam Barbados Lupus Rex, a level 7 6-cost 4/6 unit with the ability of increasing this unit's AP by an amount equal to the damage it's received. So for every point that HP goes down, the AP goes up. And at the end of turn, you could choose one of your Tekkadan units, deal 1 damage to it, and set it as active. The problem immediately is, what Tekkadan card does this benefit?
I guess, wait, hold up. Gundam Barbados Lupus Rex is a Tekkadan unit, right?
Correct.
So you link it, and then you swing with it, and then it re-stands itself.
Yes, and then...
Thumbs up.
And then for shooting itself for 1, you get +1 AP. The biggest play pattern for this is the fact that it's just a unit that over the course of several turns will wind up turning into a unit with absolutely massive AP, but given that almost all HP values in this game are normalized values that could be represented on a D6, getting up to 12 AP isn't really that useful, is it?
Right. It's it's like so you can get the bragging rights or the bonus points where you can tell your friend at locals what crazy thing you did with Barbados Lupus Rex that probably didn't even matter. So yeah, that's definitely a confusing aspect about the design, being able to get up to that 9 on its own and then an additional 2 from the pilot. It's like, okay, cool, I have an 11 AP. What does this interact with? ?
How is having 11 AP meaningfully different from having 8 AP?
Right.
And of course, a lot of people have the immediate thought, I've had the immediate thought, well, Tekkadan synergizes a lot with damaging your own unit, so it synergizes with that, right? Well, almost all Tekkadan units that synergize with taking damage do so where they get a benefit, such as giving a unit negative AP when this unit takes damage from one of your own effects. So that is immediately defeated by the fact that Lupus Rex's ping happens at end of turn.
Right. It's something that would turn the marginal upside of like, oh, well, you take the downside of getting the ping and it gets these bonus effects. It's something that takes that upside and basically just makes it a downside, unfortunately, because, like you said, it's happening at the end of turn.
And so the biggest benefit that we find with this effect is just making it harder to deal with your units. Obviously, if your units aren't rested, they can't be swung at, so your opponent has to commit more resources to either rest them or find ways to deal with them outside of combat, which can be a marginal benefit. The secondary benefit is, for example, your purple blockers in Tekkadan. You could swing them and just make a quasi-Archangel play where you shoot them for 1 to reactivate them so they're ready to be blockers again, and that's all fine, but generally we need our LRs to be doing more, especially in Tekkadan, where since it's divorced from the Amuro side of blue at this point and has lost one of its big blue tools and the thing that it was using to really flesh itself out by running a whole bunch of 2/1/2/2s, like Tekkadan is struggling for an identity, and this card doesn't really fix anything in the archetype.
Yeah, the most nice things I can say about this card, unfortunately, is something that has nothing to do with the mechanical design of the card itself, but this is probably one of my favorite LR arts in the game. I think it's just unfortunate that it ended up on this card.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that this art wound up with this text. And normally here on Side 9, we try to see the positive side in just about any card. There are plenty of cards that a lot of people will call outright bad that I will fight tooth and nail and be like, it could potentially have some home in the future. I oftentimes get egg on my face from that, so I hope that you guys take it to heart when I'm like, I don't see the home for this card. This is a card that they're going to have to pretty explicitly print some dedicated synergy for, something that's just going to be like, yeah, give your card named Lupus Rex first strike or something. As is, this card is almost unplayable, and given that there isn't a lot of interesting things to talk about with it, I just kind of have to, unsatisfying, leave it with one of our few bad ratings.
This is the Side 9 bad rating First Blood. I hope you're proud of that one, Cole.
This card makes me mad.
On a more shiny note, let's talk about Shining Gundam. So this is a level 4 3-cost unit with 3 AP and 4 HP. On deploy, you can choose 2 MF unit cards from your trash and exile them from the game, and then you can recur back a special move command card from your trash and add to your hand. Alongside that, it links with Damon Kashu, and then on attack, you can choose a rested resource to set as active. So this is kind of a self-fulfilling machine, which is kind of funny to say self-fulfilling because, not really, because you need to be seeing 2 other key cards in order to get the most out of this play pattern. So of course, let's go ahead and talk about those. We have Damon Kashu, which is a typical level 4 +2/+1 pilot, but it allows you to draw 1, discard 1, and then activate the special move of the card that you discarded. And of course, you have the ability to kind of pair this whole entire play pattern with Shining Finger, which allows you to rest a guy and then give one of your Shining Gundams first strike. So when executing the full play pattern, basically, you get to get something back. You get to have a 5 AP, 5 HP unit. You get to first strike the opponent's card that you just rested, by the way. So there's like a lot going on. And if that wasn't already enough, you're going to be restanding a rested resource. So if you have something like a 2/1/2/2 or a Darkness Finger or basically any other special move command that you want to play, this also extends the play pattern. So I'm sure a lot of you in the audience right now are thinking about this and just going, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stuff going on. And you'd be right, that is a lot of stuff going on. But of course, this is a very specific 3-card combo that you would like to have set up by level 4. So that's, kind of the pie in the sky scenario where we see Shining Gundam at its absolute best.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to note, and before we get into any of the combat effects, is at baseline. with the correct card in hand, Shining Gundam plus Demon Kashu does represent effectively a +2.
Yep. There is just good value to be had with this card. And of course, that's not to say that this is a card to scoff at if the opponent fails to see the link or the shining finger, because of course you're still getting effects out of this card, right? So on deploy, you get your card back. On attack, you can set resources active, so like it helps you both in getting a +1 and then also just helping your action economy. So this card absolutely could just be played as a vanilla unit, and you have to wait to start swinging with it and start resetting resources, and that's fine. It's not something where we necessarily want the deck to be at, just considering we want to be playing all of these decks to its strengths. And that's something that Mobile Fighter, as mentioned in the Master Gundam segment, is something that you want to be getting specific lines and combos every single time that you're playing the deck, because that's where we get to reach its ceiling. And that's also kind of a way of compensating for some of the deck's weaknesses. Because we have higher command counts that then, kind of mess with our ability to draw into units effectively to then start swinging shields in the mid to late game to actually close out the game. A lot of times, at some point in a Mobile Fighter deck, you're going to end up with some awkward hand that doesn't go exactly where you want it to. And so that's like a clear downside of the deck that doesn't really exist in other archetypes in Gundam Card Game, just because of how unit focused the game has been up until this point. There's a lot of decks in the game that are basically going like even as high as like 42 42 units and 8 pilots, with even some blue-purple decks that decide to cut bases, right? So because of how unit-focused the game is, we want to be getting the high roll here to just make up for the fact that at some point along the game, you're going to stumble a little bit with a line that's not resource efficient and not efficient at just like developing units to try to end the game.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most notable part of Shining Gundam as a piece of the archetype. It is kind of the synthesis point where it itself is the body, obviously. It gets the special move that you need, provided that other cards have been going right previously in the game. And then it even gives you back the resource you need to activate it. So even if we're not doing the Shining Finger play with it, it is still setting you up to continue doing what your deck does. However, that comes with the downside of, due to how the archetype is developed, Shining Gundam being your centralizing point also bites you in the ass if you aren't playing Shining Gundam that turn.
Right. It's, sometimes it can feel a little bit feast or famine, but I feel like the upsides of this card are numerous. Of course, the whole entire breakdown earlier in this section just really shows just how much more you get, even in comparison to something like RX-78 plus Amuro, which is something that's been hailed as just like one of the best LR, level 4 on curve plays in the game. And of course, we're getting something with the full play pattern, something that's even stronger than that. So surely that shows the ceiling and potential of this card. But given the downsides, card's still very strong, but I think that this card lands very clearly in playable.
Alright, and with the Shining Gundam out of the way, that leaves one last LR to cover for this booster. And it's very funny because it's the first LR that was ever revealed for this set, well in the middle of EBO1 season, and that is Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz version, Wing Gundam Zero Custom for those of you in the know. And this is a level 6 5 cost white unit that's a 5/4, so it's a shift of G-Team from green to white. And it is interesting because it is following the new paradigm of white in that when a rested enemy unit is played, this unit gains suppression. Over the past 3 sets, but most notably starting in GDO4, we have kind of shifted from suppression being the keyword of the color purple to a keyword of the color white. Almost all of our good suppression units now are white units, and they're coming out at faster, lower levels, lower costs than they are in purple. To make up for that, they tend to have more conditionals. However, it also has what we have repeatedly proven since GDO1 to be one of the best effects in the game. It has Unicorn Destroy Mode's effect of on attack, choose one enemy unit rested. There's no targeting of HP, no targeting of level. If it's on their field, they rest it. So it rests the unit and sets up its own suppression.
Yeah, I think that's one of the clear strongest points, just reading the card, from that first ability to that second ability. Obviously, it's a card that sets up its own conditional for itself, which is, just kind of a joy, because it's not really contingent on the opponent having to make that specific play of having to rest something. But, like, obviously, that's a clear power point of the card. It's like, oh, well, you rest the thing that can block against the suppression, and okay, well, if they had nothing rested before, now they do. All right, cool, now I have suppression, right? So it kind of like executes itself as like a very simple computer program that you learn in an early computer science class, and I mean, hey, that's strong enough as it is.
Hello World Gundam it is.
Hello World Wing Zero Gundam Endless Walt.
But yeah, so I think a huge part of what really captures the essence of this card's power is, if we look at its effects, it's an on-attack trigger. There's no during pair, when linked, there's no huge conditionals on it, and because it satisfies its own condition, this winds up being a hilariously generic card. This can go in almost any white deck. You don't even need heroes to link it in order to get value out of it. Of course, having said that, our new white hero with level 4, 1 cost, plus 2 AP, plus 1 HP. When it destroys card in your opponent's shield area with battle damage, you give something on the field minus 2 AP. Slightly worse than Kira. The fact that we're comparing it to Kira, though, kind of speaks to the strength of the pilot, doesn't it?
Yep.
So even with that, this is a linkable unit. It's a suppression unit that hits the board quickly, so you can very quickly start threatening your opponent's shields with it. Since it tamps down something on its own, this means that it's a very difficult unit to block unless you're fielding multiple blockers. And of course, you as the Wing Zero player are trying to actively interact with your opponent, so you're going to do your best to make sure that they never have more than one blocker, so that the way this unit can connect. And I think that that's just really what pushes this card forward, is just the idea that it's a generic suppression unit. It's not complicated. How you utilize this card is not some deep thing. It is just a big scary thing that your opponent has to deal with, because it's going to greatly shorten their game clock.
Right. And that's, I think if there were a negative to this card overall, I think it's mainly just because it's a little bit of a one-trick pony, because it's giving up a little bit of its power budget to have the powerful ability and to be a suppression unit. It doesn't do the 1v1 unit combat thing that Wing Gundams are known to do, specifically referring to the starter deck green Wing Gundam Link, which is a 7/7 breach 5, can swing at level 4 or lowers. So this card, something has to be happening in your game for you to want to actually swing an opponent unit with this. And so, of course, that compels you to make the suppression play with this card. So the fact that you're kind of influenced on how and why and what you're playing with this card, I think can, sometimes lead to some awkward game states where, yes, you technically still can swing board with this card, but the fact that it has 4 HP means that it's going to be trading with whatever we're swinging, I think can definitely be a downside of the card for sure.
That's generally the best way, I think, to put it, because it's generic and as comparable to other things in this class. Like, it is pretty much all upside, but to temper that, as those upsides aren't as high as they could be. And one of my favorite examples of this is, for example, in control versus control matchups. I've definitely been in scenarios where I've been sitting across from a Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz and just go, okay, cool, I'm going to pass my turn back to you without playing a unit, because that means that your Wing Zero only takes 1 shield, because I'm not giving you something to have rested so it doesn't gain suppression. And in those control matchups, metering that damage that way isn't usually an option for a lot of decks. Normally you can't just afford to pass back to your opponent, but the trade-off for it not just having suppression outright means that sometimes it just doesn't have suppression, right?
Yep, definitely small corner cases where this card, it can't reach its full potential.
Yeah, and again, and even when it's hitting its full potential, it's a faster way to get to suppression, but past level 7, sometimes you're just looking at a card that is effectively just trying to be Gundam X, which is not a card we were playing anyway. So that is the downside to how generic it is that it's also not like the card that makes your deck worth playing. It's more of a card that's going to ride the coattails of other archetypes that are doing things or being heavily invested in the G-Team archetype. And I think with that, it's feels strange because it's a generically good card. It has good upsides, so that would make it a good card. And I think that this is like as high as you can go in the playable archetype, because with that, there's still not a whole lot of onus that I'm like, oh, this is a card that I want to play, so much as this is a card that I'm going to play in an existing deck that synergizes with it.
So there's all our LRs in this set, and oh boy, they really didn't mess around when designing those. Like with most sets, there's still plenty on offer here with their rares and below too. Just like with the LRs, they seem to have gotten a quality boost too. So let's go into the highlights.
Hashmal is another generic good blue card. Hashmal gets to deploy a 2/1 Pluma unit token whenever it destroys an enemy card with battle damage and gains the same amount of repair as the number of those tokens that you have on the field. Definitely a card the opponent will want to kill on sight so it doesn't run away with the game.
Titans are getting a small piece of support with Ashmar that gets AP +2 and repair 1 when linked. So there's a 3/4 before any pilot stats that make it a great stat stick relative to the level and cost with a keyword that we absolutely need.
A modal action timing command for 2 cost level 5, Wings of Light lets you either bounce an enemy unit with 5 or less HP, or recover 3 HP on a unit. The modality counts for something here, and while the first effect is akin to something like Witch of Bride, that card isn't really played, so this card will need to find space in a specific build where both effects can be useful, should a deck like that exist, either now or in the future.
An absolute powerhouse stat stick. Gundam H2 Double Bullet can pay 1 at action timing to bring its total AP to 8, but also reduces enemy damage by 2 once per turn as long as you have an Earth Federation pilot in play. Nothing super flashy or exciting, but in terms of raw stats, it's hard to argue against this.
Even more age support and Green Amuro synergy? Age 2 normal SP's ability is simple. When it's destroyed, you can salvage a green Earth-fed pilot from your trash, but you discard 1 for the privilege of doing so. As we all know, a link at the right time can make all the difference in this game, and this can help you do that more in exchange for a lower base rate and needing to account for when destroyed.
Having a breach card that can stick around and breach again is pretty cool. Gundam Schwarzette attempts to do exactly that, with Breach 3 and the ability to exile 2 commands from trash to reduce enemy unit damage by 2. Schwarzette wants to make the opponent work a little harder to prevent the value. The reduction effect isn't once per turn either, so if you have the commands, you can cash in the value.
Lauda Neil is basically a char for Academy, which is very useful since Academy needs to connect to shields. It needs something to push forward aggro.
The biggest Timmy card in the game. Interwoven Blessings can place an EX resource on burst, but for a whopping 10 resources at level 10, you can destroy the first 2 cards in the opponent's shield area. Cool. You know what else can do that? Having 2 units on the board and swinging with them. Regardless, it is cool design space to see a command that can deal damage to the opponent.
Darkness Finger is close combat at level 4, but for half the cost. And, of course, if you have a Master Gundam on field, it cantrips.
If Overflowing Affection made you discard first before drawing 2, it would be a worse card. That's what Airframe Seizure does. While the only scenario that this is better than Overflowing Affection is turn 1 going first, having this in a color with traditionally no cantrips is welcome and appreciated.
The newest Barbados Lupus is a draw 1 high maneuver unit at level 4, requiring you to rest a Galahorn unit. While we're in no rush to play Galahorn, and thus this card might sit in the binder for a while, should good G-Horn units get printed, this card could emerge from the past.
Gundam Flaros is a unit tailor-made for dealing with level 2s. Both on deploy and attack, you can destroy a level 2 or lower unit. The ban list definitely changed the immediate use case, but with many archetypes still choosing to play their chosen 2/1/2/2, and plenty of decks still fielding their level 0 tokens, we reckon it isn't a horrible idea to include this in sideboards.
Widespread Annihilation is a symmetrical board wipe killing all level 4s and below for a steep level 6/6 cost. While not every deck may be interested, the potential to get a trade that is a 1 for 2 or more is pretty tempting, and plenty of slower decks have gaps in their level 6 plays to make space for this.
Catra Ribera Winner has a very similar ability to Amuro, this time resting a unit that is level 5 or lower. The links for Catra are not as diverse nor powerful, but it is welcome to get this fan-favorite ability in a new color.
For 1 cost at level 3, Incendiary Spark gets you to -2 AP with the unit, but if you use an EX resource to play it, you also get to rest that unit. With no condition on what we're resting, getting the full effect is definitely more than 1 card's worth of value. But this likely only finds a home in decks that are generating EX resources, like Ramp decks, Academy decks, or this fucking thing.
A Wind Against Fires is a 1-cost level 5 version of Unforeseen Incident. What we get for 2 extra levels though is Modality. We can choose either the -3 AP, or we can get a +1/+2 pilot. More stats than you'd usually get for a command pilot. 2 HP can make a huge difference for a ton of units, plus there's this 4 more copies of Zex for anyone still looking to beat someone down with an Epion.
Presidential Office is standard base fare, with 5 HP for 1 cost at level 2. However, when it's destroyed, you have an opportunity to be resource efficient and deploy another Presidential Office from your hand by exiling the old one from your trash. This can be played if your archetype doesn't have a definitive base option. It also has a funny high roll, allowing you to keep chaining your bases together if you happen to hit it in the late game.
Let's talk about Minerva Squad for a little bit. Bandai gifted us another Destiny Gundam this set. This one is a big unit with first strike, reducing enemy battle damage in the process. If the opponent fields a large unit, in the old deck we were put into uncomfortable situations where GDO4 Destiny has to trade with their unit, locking you out of getting multiple attack triggers over several turns, which is arguably like the best play pattern that Destiny Gundam has. So, in addition to that, we have the new Force Impulse that gives us a relatively inexpensive way to cycle Shin Asuka's back into our hand, so we no longer have to play at virtual card advantage -1 until level 7, waiting to pair it with Destiny. We can kind of freely put Shin on our Impulse Gundams and trade with something, and then this Force Impulse can get it back so we can finally go the big play at level 7.
The new Quiet Zero is a really funny package. The goal is to create a board state where your opponent isn't able to rush you on the low end by linking, and you also have the ability to answer units they play before they get to swing because they come in rested. Combine that with a base that produces units and an Anthem pilot, and getting all the pieces into play is compelling. Unfortunately, its limited card options, high necessary level to execute relative to levels it stuns, leave this package wanting. However, a card or two more and an additional package that wanted speed moderation, and this could meaningfully grind some games to a crawl.
The blue orb cards of this set set up a core tempo game plan. Waldfeld's Murasame with Andrew Waldfeld gives us a 4/5 linked repair unit that draws a card back as long as you have an orb pilot in play, with the Katsuki Uwashi getting cheaper the more orb units you have in play, creating a tempo lead with its wind-linked bounce effect, and regular Murasame getting high-mo for the turn when another orb unit hits the field. Orb looks to get decent openings to swing at those shields, and can carry that pressured forward to win in the mid-game.
Oh boy, somewhat fresh mechanics. GDO5 gives us a new class of unit that Rial and I, for the time, are simply calling rush units, at least until the community dubs them with an agreed title. These are down-statted units that can swing at a rested unit turn their play, no link required. This allows them to work as removal commands effectively, but it also means that with synergy, or if your opponent isn't putting up enough resistance, they can still function as normal units. With the individual card evaluations out of the way, it's almost time to get down to brass tacks and show you some deck lists. Normally, Rial and I like to provide some qualitative commentary on how confident we are and how a deck will perform in the upcoming format.
And we're still going to do that this time. However, given the exodus of 2/1/2/2s and the outright removal of blue-purple aggro as it was, it's much harder to establish a baseline. Given that, we just want everyone to be aware that the potential for us to be completely wrong is even higher than normal.
However, Rial and I have been grinding these decks with a smaller roster than our previous videos. We've spent much more time making sure these decks perform. Each of these is a deck we plan on adding to our stable, and is likely a deck we'll be taking to events. So without further ado, let's get into it.
And oh boy, we are starting on an absolute doozy. This is a variation of blue-red control. We see some old favorites in Gundam Card Game from the very first set and beyond, and of course we're combining that with the poster child of the new booster GDO5 Strike Freedom Gundam. Tell me what you have cooking up here, Fulminatus.
Anybody who's been paying a lot of attention to Side 9 is probably unsurprised. I'm pretty open about the fact that I've been playing some form of Banshee Destroy since GDO1, because even now, it's probably one of the scariest LRs in the game. So of course, when a new blue control piece got revealed in Strike Freedom, I immediately knew where I was going to try to home it first. What I didn't expect was it to find a home in a deck where it does exactly what the deck needs to function. And so it wound up leading to a cycle of every time I would test this deck, I needed a bit more my cards to be played immediately, which means that we're looking more at commands. So every time I would iterate on it, the unit count would drop just a little, the command in would increase just a little bit, and then of course with the reveal of Airframe Seizure and Darkness Finger, those two immediately became slot-ins with the deck, meaning more commands and even less units, and it eventually got whittled down to a deck that I am very confident in that you see in front of you now, where we have a grand total of 15 units in the entire deck. I am one of the first to admit Gundam Card Game is a game about units, but that doesn't mean that we have to play anything but the best 15.
We can also stretch up to, I guess 19 if you want to, 21, 23 if White Base and Corsica can make several units, I guess, if you really want to stretch upwards. But yeah, base units just at 15. And so that's very interesting, Of course, you're going to want to be swinging shields at some point throughout the game, but this deck kind of has a little hidden secret in the fact that just because your deck only has 15 units doesn't mean that you're going through that same deck the entire game, because of course, Banshee Destroy is going to be shuffling cards from your discard back into your deck.
Yeah, so that's the real power of this deck, is when we look at the card counts, the most of you can run a card in Gundam Card Game is 4, so means the most you can play a card is 4 times, right? Incorrect. With Banshee Destroy shuffling cards back, there have been several games where I will resolve one card 5, 6, even once I resolved an airframe seizure 7 times in a game. It turns into a consistent value engine, so the rest of the deck needs to be focused on making sure the game lasts until that point where Strike Freedom really takes over as the control kingpin of the game. It turns out that this card is insane. Being able to play a powerful unit that then gets you more draws just continues fueling this deck. And then the biggest deal is your opponent playing a unit and letting it sit and you not being able to immediately answer it. It's potentially too big for all of these damage commands to deal with, or it's too high a level. Our biggest hit is Overwhelming Pressure, which has a level cutoff of 6. So how do we deal with that? Well, we just take all those commands that couldn't kill it and we discard them to let Strike Freedom just spin it to the bottom of deck.
Yeah, or I suppose 7 AP with the ping and first strike can also help you do that. So there's several routes that can lead you to your desired outcome in this deck, and that's just kind of where we go with it. More value, more pings, just more everything. This deck really just has a way and an outlet to just get you from point A to point B. And sure, it may be a little bit more involved to get you there. It may involve having to play several ping commands. It may involve having to link, and there goes your 12 cards in discard pile all the way back to deck. But there are ways to have answers in this deck, several of them.
Yeah, and a huge benefit again to Banshee Destroy tucking cards back. Early on, if you need to vie for board because your opponent just has a really threatening unit, you can link Akira to a Strike Rouge in order to just get that trade, or to get one card deeper because Kira's link is going to get you a card. It's fine because once that gets traded away, it'll get tucked back and suddenly you're back at your maximum copies of Kira in deck, right?
Yep, always resets itself.
And I think that's the big deal about this deck that just really lets it shine. You are using these commands to grind the game to an absolute halt, and then once you get over that level 8 hump, there just really isn't any individual deck in the game that competes with this deck for just the sheer amount of power you could put out every turn. Strike Freedom just immediately wins against any other singular card because it doesn't care, it doesn't fight it, it just sends it away. And then Banshee Destroy, of course, has First Strike combined with Marita's Ping. This means that anything that has 8 HP or less just gets first struck out of the game.
Right, it is fun too, because once the game is kind of winding down, once you've effectively done the grind game and your opponent's running out of cards, of course you still have to go for those shields, so it might take you a turn or two extra to just finally get through all of them. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of states in this game where in testing we end up in these late game scenarios where we have 7 to 8 cards in hand, the opponent barely has 1 to 2, they're trying to do their best to get a link that wouldn't even kill us. So those play patterns, while, not necessarily a given strength of a deck, because it doesn't really matter how or why you win in Gundam Card Game, just matters that you do. Those are play patterns that are always really fun because it feels like you're just getting the rewards of playing a well-executed game plan throughout the game, just making sure you had answers and cashing your value when it mattered.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice. If you look at this deck and you go, oh, I'm going to copy that and play that, the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is just be patient. This deck rewards being patient and calculated and keeping a very close eye on how many resources, in the sense of not only the stuff that we use to pay costs, but the amount of cards available to you, how many resources you have, how many resources your opponent has, and carefully modulating and managing that. A huge part of how I make sure I secure wins with this deck is actually, once we cross that level 8 threshold, even still tempering my aggression, only popping 1 to 2 shields per turn, just to avoid that scenario where 2 pilots are buried in shields and I pop both of them, send them to my opponent's hand, and now he can double link and kill me, right?
It's definitely the trade-off that you take with one of those decks. I see that in our little document here, we're talking about New Gundam, and of course, if you just slam a unit on the board to kind of just be food for New Gundam, I'm sure that you can just have some rough times because the deck is vying for tempo and it's trying to get rid of your shields as fast as possible. And of course, we do have pretty cost-efficient ways to deal with things. But of course, the commands don't target the wide range of literally everything all at once. So I'm sure there's some steps that can happen in a game where you're on the back foot in terms of tempo, and you have to, call for some desperate measures to kind of claw your way back in the game as well, if this deck, has a clear weakness in that aspect.
Running into like a blue-green new deck where they recognize what matchup they're in and they start really trying to play the matchup as opposed to what a lot of more mid-range decks, especially people who aren't used to playing against a deck like this, kind of just autopilot. They just like play their curve, and so they keep dropping units in order for me to eat them. Instead, what happens is they are willing to sit on their resources. They're willing to pull it up. They'll give me Londo Bell units to target to start filling up the yard, but they'll purposely sit on their resources so that way they wait until I start developing things like Banshees or Strike Freedoms, and then they look at me and they go, okay, cool, you presented something that's vulnerable, that's going to get new Gundam now. I get Breach 5 twice, and suddenly I'm in an environment where, because of how slow this deck is, we give up some shields over the course of the game just as the nature of playing the game. But now, because you just did that twice in a turn, I ran out of shields long before I could stabilize.
Right. And here's a cool new section that we're adding to these deck lists just because of the rule change that we got in English about potential sideboards that they may implement even as early as this set. What are some cards that you may want to slot into this deck given the matchups or just rounding out ratios and things like that within this blue-red control?
So a very obvious side deck consideration for just about any red deck is all-range attack. Being able to deal damage to every enemy on the board is inherently valuable. If we're dealing with one-year war, you pop a Zeong and it dumps out all of its tokens, well, all-range attack cleans that up for you. The handful of aggro decks that still exist, being able to get that wide-range damage, it's really good. However, it's a sideboard consideration largely just because if you're running into a deck that isn't doing that, it's overcosted for what you get. Another large consideration, especially if you're considering all-range attack in order to help cover a weakness of it, is Battle of Aces. Battle of Aces is more damage for the resources spent. You're getting improved technique, levels of damage for 2 resources. That's a big deal. However, that unit has to already be damaged, and so all-range attack is a great card to set it up, or using like a Merida ping to set it up. However, in base form, generally speaking, we just want to make sure that we're one-for-oneing, so if we're damaging a unit, it's dying anyway. There aren't a lot of opportunities for Battle of Aces to really push further for damage. Usually what we're doing is we're looking at units that are either full health or dead, so we don't want to keep it main deck. And then another big consideration is both Kshatriyas that we have between the LR Kshatriya, because linking Merida means that we get our 1 ping off of the swing, but then we get to ping 1 or 2 units when it gets paired, plus it's a 7/5, which is a very relevant stat amount, especially given that we're watching more and more 6 HP bases come out. It becomes a great unit to clear base and slow the tempo of the game. And then Kshatriya Besarung actually is the opposite end, where it's more of a generic unit, but because it's a unit that replaces itself and offers that Merida link, it allows it to continue pushing the deck when you get into that late game scenario by giving you something that can just live on the board for an extended period while your opponent is trying to figure out how to deal with the Banshee Destroy or the Strike Freedom that is the bigger threat.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like a pile of stats that replaces a card, which you want some card velocity anyway, so that would slot in real easy. But with all that said, this is a deck that, Fulm brewed it here. It's a genius deck. I love this thing. I think both of us are going to be trying to play this when the set drops. And that's just kind of all there is to it. But let's ask you the real important question, because I'm sure you'll be happy answering this one. How confident are you on this deck?
Confident enough in this deck that this is just going to be the deck I'm playing this format. So
I think
the confidence level is I'm playing this one.
This one is the deck that gets played. Sounds good.
We have covered the LR that I think people are generally most excited for in Strike Freedom. However, it's time to go over the archetype that I think people are most excited for. This is a beloved Gundam series, the first alternate universe we ever went into, and genuinely, at least in my opinion, one of the best shonen experiences ever put to screen. Riala, why don't you talk to us about Mobile Fighter?
Awesome. So we talked about our 2 LRs in Mobile Fighter here and the LR breakdown, and we kind of went into the deck's play patterns a little bit there alongside where it falls short. But in summary, basically, we have these units, these mobile fighters, that want to be linked with special moves. So in the case of Cyclone Punch, it is a AP-2 command that can also pair itself as a pilot that pairs well into Gundam Maxter, allows you to get more special moves back from the top 4 of deck. So you activate the command, it goes to the discard, it then goes ahead and pairs to one of your MF units on your field, so this time it's Gundam Maxter. And so basically, that kind of sets the tone for a lot of what Mobile Fighter is trying to do. We have these signature Gundams, we have these Gundams that get added bonus benefits from playing their specific special move command. So in the case of Darkness Finger, it's deal 2, but if you have a Master Gundam on the field, draw 1. Shining Finger, it's the rest of the thing. It gets first strike. Shining Gundam goes in with the first strike and you get the full play pattern. So basically, it's kind of just playing this little sub game of get your specific combo to do the highest ceiling play possible with these cards. So of course, that is a tall ask. Gundam Card Game, traditionally, even seeing links is not the most specific or consistent thing in the world that we can have here. So we're playing the split of 4 Overflowing Affection to Airframe Seizure because of this deck that cares a lot about being able to find its specific cards. And so that's more or less what we're doing here. We take 1v1ing very seriously, AP- first strike. Oh yeah, their cards are dead, our cards live, awesome. Then on the following turn, we then need to start making some headway on the opponent's shields. And that's basically what the deck plays. It plays at this like mid-range style where it takes combat very seriously early on, given you get your full play pattern, and then you just try to keep on going shields because you're going to have to close out this game eventually.
Yeah, I think that is probably the easiest way to nutshell this archetype. Is Gundam Card Game is historically a game of 2 card combos. We have now introduced an archetype that wants to consistently play 3 card combos. However, the upside for hitting all 3 cards is massive.
Yep, it definitely gets you there. And of course, it's pretty unrealistic to want to, basically daydream and think about what happens if you just get your 3 card combo every single turn of the game. It's just, I'm telling it right here, folks, after having playtested this deck, it's just not something that happens. And so then the real question becomes, is the tangible upside of getting the 3 card combo enough to justify for the turns where you don't necessarily have a whole lot going for you and you don't have your specific combos? We're doing a little bit to try to patch up that weakness, just a little bit, because we're playing all these special moves in their specific Gundams, we don't have a whole lot of space to really mess around with other things. But of course we have 3-2-1-2-2 and then 2 of the Strike Dagger clones. So, if you have a little bit of extra resources towards the end of the turn, maybe you active one of your resources from Shining Gundam so you can just round out your plays that way. Rising Gundam is kind of a generic mobile fighter link that allows us to rest an enemy unit. So that is there to just be there for when we don't get our specific special move command on our Maxter. So it can be a resting place for a Cyclone Punch, for example, or if you get a Damon Kashu without the Shining Gundam, you can have that be there and kind of function a little bit like an Amuro. So there are play patterns that are kind of contingency plans if you don't get your full combo, but obviously these are not things that you're super happy to be doing. They're things that provide you, pretty decent amounts of value, but in terms of an opportunity cost, it's rough kind of making those plays because you have the glimpse of just how much better your game could be going had you drawn to your correct cards.
Yeah, I think that is just the point to hammer home. We talk about the 3-card combo, and it's the getting there that is the issue. Once you're there, everything's great. However, the deck is going to ask you to kind of do that somewhat consistently. You don't need to drop a 3-card combo every turn, but the deck may ask you to drop that 3-card combo every other turn. Otherwise, you're going to start slowly falling behind. But again, upside is that the payoffs are huge. One of my favorite examples of this is everybody's aware of LR Shining Gundam and the fact that it can represent what is ending up going to be a relative +3 because you'll get 2 cards off of playing the combo, and then it first strikes an enemy unit. So you take their unit without losing anything on your end. So +2, they go -1, that's a relative +3. But a huge benefit that I don't see many people talking about because I think that they think about the card in kind of a backwards way is Shining Gundam Super Mode. Everybody gets really focused on that suppression keyword, and it's understandable. Suppression is very powerful, it's very scary, and it's a great way to catch up if you're at like a shield disadvantage or just force your opponent to start panicking because their clock is down. But the other thing that it has going for it is that it gets that +2 AP when it's linked. Now, we just talked about with Barbados Lupus why like having massive AP usually isn't that big a deal, but this does mean that you have a unit that gets up to 8, which is generally as big as units get in this game. And then you have a command that just gives it first strike.
That is some application for sure. It's also the reason why we're playing the 2-1-2-2. I think maybe we would just play it anyways, just again as a way to round out our plays to be resource efficient. But I mean, hey, another Shining Gundam, another card to get first strike, more application for the card. I want to talk about a little bit more about the negatives of this deck, because sometimes even though the high roll is absolutely massive, there are some easy ways to kind of just be dealt with. So again, let's lay out the scenario where we do the full Shining Gundam thing. It's awesome. We're feeling on top of the world. We get our rest, we get our first strike, we get our draw, we get our pitch, we get our resource set is active, we get our special move command back. That again, Rap God, we're doing everything. That's like 7 sentences worth of stuff, right? So let's say you first strike something, and it is like typically, obviously, when we want to be high rolling like that, we want to be high rolling even further, because that's actually what's going to be setting us meaningfully ahead in the game, especially having to find those cards to do it. So if the opponent has, a RX-78 and is able to, tag a Rizel into our Shining Gundam, the Shining Gundam is finally dealt with, or they have AP minus effects like something like Kira or Sandrock with Winter, and just a way to meaningfully deal with Shining Gundam. Well, that card was kind of your main thing that was propelling your game forward, so being able to attack at the shields. And unfortunately, because the game is so high demanding on like what you need to be able to play at your highest ceiling, then it's like, okay, well, ask the question of what's left in your hand after that. So if the opponent has meaningful answers to your things, this is not an easy archetype where you can just bounce back and do the same thing again and again and again. You're going to eventually have a dud turn. So this is one of those interesting cases where if the opponent has meaningful spot removal, even if they have to link to do it in order to take care of your cards, because of the inconsistency of this deck, our follow-up not being as strong means that they're probably just rewarded for taking that play of, just playing the spot removal and getting rid of your Shining Gundam right there and then.
Yeah, I think that's a key blind spot in the deck, is that your commands enhance your units. So if you're ever in a scenario, because you potentially run heavier command lineups here, where you have your commands and you don't have your units, your commands have really cool text on them that does not matter right now.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about key sideboard considerations, and of course, given the fact that we're within archetype, most of this is just kind of filling out the slots of cards that already existed within your deck. So of course, we can go for the full playset of Master Asia. If we're really scared about aggro, we could play, some of the Gundam Exia Pinger. So if we're, really scared about playing Gundam Extra Repair plus 2-1-2-2 plus, Gun Tank or something, I don't know. That could be a good card in here. We can round out the playset of vanillas. If you just want better ways to round out your resource curve, it's very possible that we end up on a list of this deck that just recognizes, hey, Shining Gundam restands 1, we want the full playset of Shining Gundam, so we just have easy ways to develop the board while also not getting in the way of our tempo. And then also, these are some units that did not make it into the list just because it's, kind of an additional MF card. But Bolt Gunman Graviton Hammer allows you to activate rests, as well as Bolt Gundam just being a pretty decent stat line with the extra +2 HP that Graviton Hammer is getting it. So if we ended up that we just wanted to go even more high roll and we're just like, all right, let's just grab it, we can do that. Although Shining Finger typically does that job pretty well enough, just because we're already going to be resting an opponent's unit with that card. But yeah, those are our sideboard considerations here.
And so with that, given you've playtested this deck quite a bit at this point, really trying to force the archetype, how confident are you in this deck in this upcoming meta?
Man, the fact that I'm unsure even up until this stage probably speaks volumes here. Obviously, there's some times that I play this deck and I feel like I'm just on top of the world and doing everything possible and, just, getting the exact thing I need. Obviously, there is some dull moments towards the mid-game, even within those high-roll games, because you can't just have everything literally every single turn, but those games feel pretty good because you just kind of create an early lead and sustain that lead by just holding on to it for dear life. Other times, I'm like turn 3 still playing my cantrips, trying to find anything worthwhile whatsoever to be playing, and that's a rough situation to try to come back from. So given how swingy and inconsistent this deck is at times, it's not something that I feel like super confident in taking to like a large regional tournament, just because the sample size of games that you're going to be playing throughout the day is more. But at a locals environment, if you just want to run hot for 3 to 4 rounds and make sure that the down pair works on your favor, that even at smaller locals you can just play 3 rounds, right? This deck, I think, is perfectly serviceable. It has, some really cool Gundams that everyone really loves. But yeah, I think if we're talking about competitive versus, locals competitive, we're leaning a lot more towards the locals competitive side for this deck, G Gundam.
Yeah, I also think a large part of your confidence in this deck is a little rattled by another red-white archetype that we'll get into a little later.
Looking forward to that one. All right, of course, we were gassing up New Gundam earlier, so it only feels right to be featuring a deck with New Gundam. So, Film, tell me what you're doing with Londo Bell, 8 Amuro, New Gundam. What do you want to call this deck? I'll leave it up to you.
I think in its current form, I've just kind of been referring to it as blue-green Amuro slop.
Sounds about right.
However, it does feel a little unfair to call it slop because this is just a wildly competent deck. I've been gassing up the blue-red build, but if you looked at me and you said, I can't play that build, this is what I'm taking. And I'm not particularly upset about it because I think that these are of relatively similar power levels. And the biggest reason is because we've been aware of it since beta format, because Amuro RX-78 has been there all along, but any deck that is playing a lot of Amuro is a deck with scary, scary tempo. And that's the primary goal of this deck, is we are just abusing tempo. New is really good at it because it's good at taking trades. Both the LR and the non-LR forms, they breach, so you get your trade, but you're still pressuring shields. Then we have Last Shooting. I think this is actually probably the closest this has been to being a directly relevant card. Being able to get multiple uses out of your blue Amuros is great, especially because this is a card that lets you trade into the scarier things, so that way you can set up a field that your green Amuros have easier units to chew on and really get more mileage out of that healing 2 every time they win a fight. And then everything that is under level 5 is just tempo, tempo, tempo. We have our green Amuros on RX-78s, live forever. Blue Amuros take the tempo. Then we're playing 2 interesting cards, in my opinion, in Jigen, which has been around since GEO1, and DJ, which is a new card, an Amuro Link. And if you're unfamiliar with it, it is a level 4, 3 cost, 3/4 that links with Amuro. If you have a non-blue new type pilot in play, it costs 1 instead. And the big deal about these cards is we are replicating what made 2/1/2/2s so powerful outside of playing them like turn 1s through 3, and that is they only cost 1, so you can just absolutely dump them out and just increase the number of attacks that are available to you. Well, this deck abuses that, but not only is it abusing that by just developing more bodies at a faster rate than most decks can, but it's backing it up with a new Gundam who is also just making more attacks than most units do.
Right, yeah, I was about to point that out if you didn't already. That's the scariest part about this deck, both playing it and playing against it. It's just that, hey, you have more attacks, but then what does Breach do? Especially if you're going to be going, into quasi-combat and then actual combat, breaching twice. There's several scenarios where by the time you hit New Gundam, that second breach actually just gets rid of all their shields. It is very possible to just win the game on the turn that you play New Gundam, and that's, I wouldn't say more games than not, but that's definitely a fair number of games.
Yeah, and so again, just the archetype is largely just focused on putting more bodies on board than your opponent and having several of your bodies being able to fight the bodies on their board and win. So we just wind up in an environment where anytime that you're looking at the board state, you're just going to have more dudes on board than they do, whether that be because you played more dudes or the handful of dudes you did play lived longer. And that just adds up over the course of the game. I mean, we've dealt with blue-purple in the past where it used pings to just make its own bodies live longer, and so it could just play more aggressive. While this is definitely a slower pace than that, largely our curve starts at level 3, it absolutely does the deal where its units just live longer. Another big point, and this is a huge part of the reason why I actually feel really comfortable starting at level 3, is we have a cheeky little tech in the fact that we are running Karasu, who is a level 3 1-cost Londo Bell pilot, +1/+1 in stats, and then during Link, enemy units other than Link units have to choose this rested unit as their attack target if possible when attacking, and then she pairs with both of our level 3 green units. And the reason that that is so impactful is, at the very least, we are getting a level 3 4/4 that your opponent is forced to attack, and it lets us check the top and put it back on top or bottom. Or the real piece that I really like using is pairing her with her Jigen, which when Jigen is deployed, you choose one of your Londo Bell units, and it can attack active units as opposed to rested units. So what happens is you play it, you pair it, you look at like the X Euro pair on their field, and then you just trade into it, and you don't care because you just have the tempo advantage now.
Right, and then also to speak a little bit about the Londo Bell count as well, because this is something that I'm seeing as a clear difference between this and other, green-blue Amuro decks that I see online. I think a lot of people are a little bit more committed to Londo Bell than they need to be, just because we have, the 12 units plus the additional news, plus Amuro, base, and Keira, just because New Gundam is specifying that we need just a Londo Bell card and trash. And so your deck build here is just choosing to play more efficient units and dropping the Londo Bell count just a little bit, because, news comes out at level 7, and you just kind of operate under the assumption it's just okay, this is enough targets. I think I kind of 22 in this deck, and something it's just all right, cool, we'll get there. And that, is that something that you feel that other deck builders are leaning a little bit too heavy into, specifically Londo Bell right now?
Yeah, I think there's a soft overcommittal. We're playing a handful of Londo Bell units that aren't super great. For example, we're playing Rigazi with the mobile weapon system, it's the back weapon system, it's BWS. And that is just a Wing Gundam Bird Mode clone, and that is a card we don't play because of how negative quality it is, even though it rams you. And so we shouldn't be leaning into Londo Bell just for the purposes of playing bad units, and with enough tempo prior to New Gundam, usually one resolution of New Gundam will be enough to put your opponent in a losing position. It may not end the game at that moment, but that will be the point that your opponent lost the game. And higher Londo Bell counts usually only benefit the idea of resolving your New Gundams multiple times. And this deck isn't really seeking to resolve those multiple times. It really wants to win by the time it resolves the first one.
It's okay, cool, I don't have to do this New Gundam thing multiple times because I have, this concept called cheap units that swing. So, cool. Yeah, we get there.
It's the idea of I have the ability to develop a New Gundam, resolve its effect, and then, I have one resource left over, here's a DJ. And so it turns out that's a huge difference, the difference between being able to just play a New Gundam and link an Amuro, and playing a New Gundam, linking an Amuro, and playing a 3/4 winds up being massive.
Tell us a little bit about your sideboard considerations going into this format.
So the biggest sideboard considerations will largely be matchup dependent. Right now, the Last Shooting covers a lot of what I've seen in testing, but that is a card that is easily subbed out. Cards I would consider replacing that with is Gundam NT1, Gundam Alex, for those in the know, just because that's another Amuro link. It essentially functions as yet another copy of RX-78. It's one level higher, but in exchange, we get one more AP. We even get a ping effect off of that, although this deck doesn't really have much to truly capitalize on the ping. It's more of just another good body with Repair 2 for an Amuro to sit on. Another large consideration, just because of what it represents in stats, its ability to eat ping and its power when combined with being piloted by a green Amuro, because it's a generic effect, is Age 2 Double Bullet. It winds up living way longer than it has any right to. It's an incredibly difficult card to challenge because at any point they have resources up, it can just have too much AP and will immediately outtrade anything. And so that is a card that solves a lot of matchups, especially if you're seeing a lot of people use effect damage, using non-combat to challenge units. It winds up dealing pretty cleanly with that because it then it eats that and then forces combat. However, one large side deck consideration that I'm very seriously considering, just because the pace of the game has slowed down enough that I think it really matters, is combining Penelope and lane aim. Having a big high maneuver unit that generates you card advantage. Like, this was something that we hyped up in the past, and it just turns out it was just too slow to really make a meaningful difference in the game. Well, now that we're in a slower game, a card that still threatens shields but generates card advantage sounds awesome.
It does the two things we want to be doing in our big bungus Gundam card game world right now, so.
Yeah. And then the final consideration, and this is more of just taking a note out of the Banshee Norn deck, we have our new Gundam, and it attacks multiple times in a turn, which is innately valuable. So one powerful thing to combine that with is just Penelope Fight Form. With its effect to force arrest every time you win a fight, it means that you can play your new Gundam, and then when it gets paired, if you played your Fight Form the same turn, then new Gundam's effect fires, it wins that fight, it forces the rest on something else, and then it just gets to immediately swing into that.
It's also pretty cool that a lot of these cards just kind of end up being a generic Earth-fed sideboard, so you can kind of mix and match there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest thing about this deck is that almost everything winds up being Earth-fed. Like, I think pretty much the only thing that isn't is DJ, which is Karaba.
All right, tell us how you feel about this deck.
Equally confident in this deck as I felt in the red-blue deck.
There you have it, folks.
On that note, speaking about decks we are confident in, you went in with high hopes for Mobile Fighter. I don't think that deck quite met your expectations. We're still piecing that one together. But having said that, there's another deck that I think you were a little reticent to get into testing, and then you picked it up for the first game and you were like, oh yeah, this is some shit.
Yeah, this deck is very real, and it's also funny because this deck also didn't meet my expectations, because my expectation was that Mobile Fighter good and this deck bad. Turns out Mobile Fighter questionable, this deck good. So you know, there we are. Let's go ahead and get into it. Obviously, we talked about during the LR breakdown, Guy Gundam is the highest ceiling play you can be doing at level 3. Go ahead and get that link, force your opponent to make a difficult decision very early on in the game. Do you want to discard a card? Do you want to have me deploy one of my many Phantom Pain units? And from that point onward, we have plenty of ways to be dealing with decks that are either aggressive or, you know, if decks are still on the Lifrith and Rick Diaz and stuff, which so far early list, it seems like they're still going to be playing, which is interesting just given you know, how they match up within the current pool of cards that are actually being played. But we have ways to get high maneuver with Chaos Gundam. We have ways to get anti-block, like choosing a card that can't block, Dirty Lou. And then also, in addition to that, we have additional discard ability with Abyss Gundam MA mode if the opponent has 4 more cards in hand. And then as well, we have the ability to deploy units for cheaper if the opponent has discarded a card, cost -2 with Guy Gundam MA mode. So one thing that's awesome about this deck is that it just feels like there's a bunch of like soft synergy that when you resolve cards in a particular sequence, you get additional abilities. And that's pretty awesome. I will admit that in a lot of my games that I tested, I just didn't see those synergies, and this game actually performed just fine. So in the games where you do see those synergies, there's like additional high roll that you can have to just like make this game a complete blowout.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the biggest quote-unquote blowout synergy is landing the Gaia Gundam and just punishing your opponent. You know, if they choose to discard so you don't deploy something free, you go, okay, cool, well then here's our Gaia Gundam MA mode that I got for cheap because you discarded a card. Or they choose to let you deploy a unit and you go, okay, cool, here is what is the equivalent to an Aegis Gundam MA mode, a card that we already know is good, but this one was free.
Right. And of course, we're comparing this to the traditional aggro decks of 2/1/2/2s. Obviously, the flavor here is very different. We're playing cards that have more cost to them. We're playing cards that actually have abilities. But I think that's actually what makes this deck more fun to play, and also just gives you more decisions and more viability overall, especially in this environment where we are past the ban list. But despite the fact that you're kind of just playing units down, there is still real thoughts and considerations around what cards to be playing. Okay, do you need to be attacking at the board? Obviously, Chaos Gundam MA mode with Abyss Gundam, if you're able to support and, you know, trade up while also breaching, that's going to be a really good scenario. Obviously, Abyss Gundam MA mode plus the Guy Gundam MA mode has that little synergy there to where you can field units faster, right? So like extrapolate that out onwards to basically every play the deck is making. Of course, you're only on 3 of your non-stellar Phantom Pain pilots, so it is a real decision point about you're going to be linking these cards immediately or you're just going to be playing them vanilla. So one thing I love about this deck, despite it at its core just kind of still being a new flavor of aggro, in addition to what we've seen in the game so far, there are still real decision points, and you can feel the impact of your decisions as you're making the plays throughout the game. You can feel the sequencing actually impact what is happening within the game, and I think that's just another added point for the deck, not necessarily for its quality, but just as a reward for playing the game and playing it well.
Yeah, I think that's what was one of the most standout parts about really getting into this deck, and why you and I found it just incredibly easy to just get a bunch of games on it. I mean, not only because aggro deck games tend to go fast, but it both rewards you for paying attention, but it also doesn't stop working if you just like decide you do want to turn your brain off and unga bunga.
Right. It is funny though to talk about a clear downside. I think, low end blockers are obviously a key point, just blockers in general. And then if you're playing against what exists left of aggro decks in this game, having the breach and things like that, being able to get you there, making them discard, making them run out of fuels even faster, can definitely get there. Although your Abyss Gundam MA mode has to hit them when they're at 4 or more. So if you're playing against aggro and you identify that early, if you have that early link, you need to go for that basically as soon as you possibly can. But one thing that is a little bit of a struggle is that if you're up against that previous deck that we talked about, Blue-Green Amuro, Gaia Gundam can fuel their new Gundam requirement. Obviously, RX-78 is good at stabilizing board. A lot of that deck's earlier curve is good at just dealing with these guys that are unpaired or unlinked on the board. So that can be a little bit of a struggle. If that deck reaches to new Gundam, I have found really hard ways to bounce back from that. And by really hard ways, I mean there's basically no ways to really go ahead and bounce back from that. So of course, decks that are equipped to be dealing with this 1v1 combat scenario and are okay with discarding a card. Ironically, even G Gundam and Mobile Fighter can do pretty well against this deck because it pitches the special move that Shining Gundam's going to grab back, and then Shining Gundam, wishes to do Fox only Final Destination against the Gaia Gundam and wins. So, anything that's particularly well versed in dealing with unit combat and stabilizing board can be a struggle for this deck, because we are, in a lot of cases, throwing the link on our unit to be able to get that swing immediately. So if the opponent can deal with it efficiently, oh boy, we're down 2 cards because of it.
Yeah, somewhat fittingly, since the deck is reliant on its units' high relative stats, essentially being a bunch of resale stat lines to protect them, in the fact that most things that would deal with them are just going to immediately 1-for-1 trade them. Very fittingly, this deck is weak to a white Kira.
Yep. That is very cool flavor and thematics, everyone. Welcome to the Phantom Pain.
And then, of course, just to talk about it, I think a huge thing that also pushes this deck is that idea of hitting those 7 cards in yard and hitting that level 6 point and then just dropping the sheer pile of stats that is a Destroy Gundam.
Yeah, it's something that's quite interesting because I didn't think that it would work at first, because to me it felt kind of incongruent with the the unit spam identity that the deck was going for. But no, absolutely, when this card is the only card left in your hand, it is the best card to be playing from your hand, because 1, it's the only card left in your hand, and 2, it's the only one that's been left over. But I mean, at that point in the game, your cards have already hit the field and probably left the field by that point in the time. It's time to bring out the big boy Destroy Gundam, which is quite literally what happens in Seed Destiny. So
yeah, it turns out a 6/6 for 5 is a good card.
Good stats, it's efficient, the opponent gets to 7 or more sooner rather than later, just because of our discard. But it does take a little bit to kind of just build up to that whole entire thing. So yeah, that's the deck. We also have Sword Strike Gundam, just because all of our Phantom Pain pilots are also Earth Alliance, so I mean it just fits in. It's a little bit of anti-aggro cheekiness in the main board. But let's go ahead and talk about sideboard considerations, because this is something that surprised me. When I first thought about it, I didn't think there were going to be a whole lot of cards to consider, but actually no, there are some real cards in both red and white that we can consider. So we can round out the playsets of our other Phantom Pain pilots that aren't stellar, because we're on 3 of each. We can play Gundam Curio's Flight Mode if we care about 1v1 unit combat, but keeping our Phantom Pain units with a little bit more abilities on the board. We can play the Gundam Exia Pinger if we're still scared about aggro, but also my favorite techs in the sideboard. I even played a couple of games with these in the deck, swapping around the ratios, removing Sword Strike. If you want to take your high roll and bring it to an even higher level of high roll, we're talking about post high roll here. We're not talking about pre high roll. We're not talking about high roll. We're talking about post high roll. We get to have our Gaia Gundam link that happens on turn 3. And then if you want to continue activating that Gaia Gundam, you can pair that with either Unforeseen Incident or Awakened Potential to, basically save Gaia Gundam, preserve Gaia Gundam, and to try to keep going for those extra activations. Now, is this something that may be a little bit too cute given more testing? Absolutely, but it's still a consideration I want to talk about nonetheless, just because, of course, we've highlighted just how important it is to, have Gaia Gundam because it's our highest, highest variance, but also our highest ceiling play. So it's like, hey, well, if you get there, why not, play the gambit a little bit longer and try to protect it as long as you can.
I think a huge part of what really pushes something like, especially Awakened Potential, but even Unforeseen Incident, given the fact that we're usually insulating either a Gaia Gundam or even like a Chaos Gundam so we can make sure we're continuing to get high maneuver, is just once this deck gets tempo, if we're playing commands that maintain that tempo, your opponent doesn't have that much time to solve the problem before you end the game.
Right. And then my favorite part is that, of course, if Gaia Gundam is living, you may very well just run into a scenario where you're running out of Phantom Pain units. But, hey, the opponent you could bluff with the opponent and pretend like you still have a Phantom Pain unit, and then they start discarding. So, hey, look, there may still be some added ceiling to Gaia Gundam, given you get to activate it several times. But that is more of a funny scenario, because I think any game where you're activating Gaia Gundam more than 2 times, I think you're just winning that one. You got him.
Yeah, you really don't have to cheat out that many cards before it becomes impossible to deal with.
Yep.
So given that, how confident are you in this deck in this upcoming meta?
Yeah, I'm very confident in this deck. This is a complete surprise to me. I love this deck. I think I'll actually start on this deck for this format just because it's cool to see kind of the new standard of aggro decks in this game. I think that this is going to be a good example of archetype-specific aggro decks. We're still going to be seeing some good stuff piles with Rezells and, the amount of 2/1s that we can still play within the game. But I think this is very cleanly just kind of redefining the speed of which we're going to be considering aggro decks in this game. And it's cool to just have this smorgasbord of abilities with additional abilities with high maneuver, support, breach, discard, cantrips, cheap effects, things like that. So it seems to be a really fun deck to play as well, given my testing with it as well. So yeah, I'd say I'm really confident in this deck. I'm looking forward to playing it.
Yeah, it also distinctly has an advantage in the fact that we talk about this basically every meta, but more aggressive decks always have a huge buff in an early format where people are playing more experimental deck lists. They aren't as familiar with matchups. So a deck like this that really takes the initiative always does really well early on.
Yep, looking to be great. All right, let's take a look at the new version of Neo Zeon, which has been in the game since set 1, but we got a purple flavor of Neo Zeon with Sazabi, as we talked about earlier on in the video. Let's go ahead and take a look at some trash synergy and some suppression and killing the opponent's units. What do you got for Sazabi Fulminatus?
Neo Zeon has always been an interesting archetype. It was one of the first archetypes we had that really cared about the trait name Neo Zeon. And so with the release of Purple Neo Zeon, not only have we expanded what is available to them, but we have also introduced an extremely high value new package. We mentioned it in the LR review, but there are 4 cards together that absolutely will lock down a game once they're set up, in the fact that you have Char's cycling Axis. Axis is letting you replay the unit that just got blown up by Sazabi. QZD, Quasis Jagdoga, is going to put itself back in hand immediately after Sazabi destroys it, and then of course in exchange for destroying your own unit, Sazabi just blows up one of your opponent's units, no fuss, no mess. So with that cycle going, you have defense covered in the fact that you're consistently replaying a base, you have offense covered because Sazabi has suppression, and you have your control covered because you're blowing up your opponent's units. It's checking all the boxes. It's really compelling. Now what it needs is a deck to get it there, right?
What's in the deck?
So we're largely focused on our Neo Zeon links. We're playing our Maritas and Kshatriyas in order to get that early ping, so that way we can make sure that we are forcing our opponent to play at our tempo. We are playing things like Darkness Finger because that is our half-cost close combat, which makes it much more playable, especially because one downside of our Neo Zeon units is that they tend to be more expensive. We tend to only have one resource left in the turn, so we don't oftentimes have the resources to field more expensive commands like Improved Technique or even sometimes Close Combat. And then, of course, an integral part of this is making sure those QJDs live and they stay on the board, especially because if you want to be resource intensive, you have to play them the turn before your Sazabi hits. And there's a huge difference between paying 6 resources to make something happen and paying 8. So given that they potentially sometimes get Darkness Fingered themselves and get wiped away, and you don't have the ability to recur those, so a huge part of what's going to insulate that is one of my favorite commands of the game that I think has struggled for a home to this point and has finally found it in Awaken Power in order to get those back.
Yeah, one thing that immediately just strikes me about this deck is that I just love the mid game that you're playing. It's just like, all right, cool, here's a well set of vanilla, here's a well set of vanilla, here's a well set of vanilla. It kind of feels like you're doing the Phantom Pain thing in the interim to get towards your Sazabi, because of course, suppression is most effective when they're down to those last 2 shields, because we can close the game out faster. Generally speaking, in Gundam Card Game, it is more beneficial to end the game quicker rather than later in the game, because just the longer the game goes, the more you're kind of playing a murky game where variance is more in effect. So being able to just field these cheap early vanilla units to then make suppression count the most for when we finally get there, definitely a strong suit of the deck. But then of course we have that flavor of ping that helps you board control as well. So overall this deck feels very well rounded in what it's trying to do, but it's coming from kind of different axes of the game, trying to bring it in and making sure that we can kind of rein in on whatever specific part of the game we're trying our best to resolve. So whether that be controlling the board, whether that being going straight for that suppression play, there's probably several branching paths that this deck can take to make sure that it's winning its game regardless.
Axis, you say. Nice title drop.
Oh, I didn't even notice that, but hey, I did it. I was intentional. I lied. It was intentional.
But to your point, yeah, one big focus of this game is obviously the level 4 2-cost lineup. We're playing our multiple units that essentially just serve as seats for our pilots in Marita and Char. But the other big advantage of these is because they are 2-cost, they are relatively cheap to get out, which means that they mitigate our relative low roll scenarios where Sazabi needs something to eat on your side of the field and you don't have its optimal target. So I am running a low end that is generally less painful to have Sazabi blow it up in the worst case scenarios.
And that's a very convenient stat line just for it to be for exactly the reasons that you just mentioned above. It's good enough to be units on its own. I assume that you're, foregoing playing anything smaller than what we have here just because its effect on the game at all other points in the game is just not beneficial enough to really justify its inclusion, right?
Well, not only that, it also gives your opponent more opportunities to just simply deal with it before you cash it in for Sazabi value.
Right?
If my opponent's choices blow up their own unit because they let a 2/1/2/2 live and Sazabi ate it, they're just going to Darkness Finger it before I get the opportunity to Sazabi it.
Right. What does this deck struggle against overall? What have you been testing against that just have problem?
So one thing that the deck has genuinely struggled a lot with is decks that are still running the handful of units that are in the game and the handful more that we are getting from the new booster of units that just reduce the effect damage they take. It's pretty reliant on its pings to get over humps or anything that is explicitly well statted. An Amuro RX-78 that is trading with your units and not dying is a huge problem because it's going to be a few turns before you get into Sazabi to potentially deal with it. And then the other side of it is decks that are able to just make lots of units even if they can mitigate that ping. So for example, League Militaire with the new pilot that stops your tokens from getting pinged creates an environment where, okay, cool, you turned your Sazabi sideways, you blew up one of your units, I'm just gonna get rid of parts token.
Goodbye pants.
Yeah, it's no more pants. And so that just creates an environment where there are a lot of corner cases where I feel like Sazabi gets punished for not being as flexible as a lot of the other LRs we're talking about. However, at any point that your opponent is really centralized on one strategy, or you've gotten into a control slug match or anything like that, suddenly Sazabi's value just becomes insane because, again, it just outright destroys an enemy unit. So if you could pare them down to the one valuable unit they have left, you've got the linked Strike Freedom on their board and that's all they got. Well, it's getting blown up and Sazabi swinging its shields anyway.
Yeah, and overall, just this deck list is quite sick just because of how, I guess, simple and straightforward the game plan is, but like having several ways to get you there. I noticed that one thing you talk about in your little description here is like mainly just like the core of this deck is something that's pretty small. It's the Char, Axis, Sazabi, and then QJD. And then the rest of it is mainly just like patch up early game problems that you may have, like any potholes in the road that you may have, to then achieve your Sazabi doing its thing late game. So that's, kind of what the rest of the deck and the rest of the package is here to facilitate.
Yeah, and I think that's, to Sazabi's credit, I think that is actually one of its biggest strengths. There are so many other packages that you can pack in with this. Obviously, I'm leaning more towards more straightforward Neo Zeon setup, but you could pair this into 8 Char and give your Sazabi high maneuver, so you have high maneuver suppression unit. You could package it in with White and go for an extremely grindy control setup. You could have blockers of your own to help temper what your opponent's doing and basically lean really heavy on Sazabi to start pulling you through on the late game. I think all of these are almost equally viable. This is the deck that I haven't really gotten the most testing on, so when we talk about confidence level, my confidence level is a little bit lower in it, but I have no doubt that at the very least, this purple core is going to find some home that is relevant. You will see it put up some kind of tournament result.
Right, and of course, being a lean engine too at just 16 cards, you can kind of just, in deck building, and of course the purple core not even choosing your secondary color, it's kind of just like, all right, cool, I got 34 other slots, let's choose a color, let's roll with it, right?
You can figure out what is problematic for you in the meta and just build the deal with that, and then just let Sazabi roam free.
Right. How are you feeling about sideboard text for this?
Obviously, we were talking about Sazabi just being a simple core. With that, there are a ton of sideboard considerations. It was very difficult to narrow it down to just a handful that are worth talking about, especially since we only have 10 sideboard slots. So the first one to mention, similar to the blue-red list, one consideration is Battle of Aces. Again, we're running a Merida deck. We're pinging for 1, having a command that come in, and then ping for an additional 3, totaling us up to 4 damage out is extremely compelling. Pretty straightforward. Battle of Aces is good for the same reason it's been good for, 5 sets now? The other big consideration, and this is actually one of the first places I thought to play this, and it makes sense because Axis is featured in the art of the card, but Widespread Annihilation. This is a deck that doesn't really have turn 6 plays and wants to find ways to deal with decks that are more aggressive than it is. So why not just run the board wipe that answers that? And the answer to that is, well, there are plenty of decks that are running units that can skip over it by being level 5, or they're better at rebuilding a board than you are. So it's very difficult to consider that for main deck, but absolutely something that I would throw in the deck box to throw in for game 2 and onwards, right?
Yep.
And then I think probably the biggest individual tech piece and probably my boldest take is the concept of running Alpha Azeru, because being a level 8/7 cost is a tall ask. I mean, we're already going to Sazabi and we're saying, hey, once we establish Sazabi, we're already winning the game. But having a massive blocker with the text of when one of your units is destroyed by an effect, draw a card, means that we have a 5th piece to add to the package. That means every time your QJD gets blown up, you just draw a card, and then you add it back to your hand. And that's crazy good, but it also further insulates, because since it just says destroyed by card effect, if you're getting blown up by like a fatal strike from your opponent, you're still getting a card there.
It's always good to cash in more value when you can. That's like, this Alpha Azeru is just kind of like if you want to go even greedier with the deck.
And this is to go even further beyond, right?
Sazabi version 3 or something? I don't know.
And then, of course, we're talking about Neo Zeon. There's always a consideration of Neo Zeon, and that is Neo Zeon. And with that, considering Sinanju, Full Frontal, just that general package, all of our units say Neo Zeon. So one cool thing about that with Neo Zeon is that we don't have to link it to Full Frontal to make all of our units count. Anything we drop out of the deck is just going to ping for 3. And that's always a consideration. But again, it's the how greedy towards the top end do we want to go?
And that's something that's perfect to just save for the sideboard because, of course, in games with sideboards, the game 1 deck is just going to be the deck that achieves the game's game plan as quickly and efficiently as possible, just assuming that we're in, something in the blind. And then of course the sideboards where you kind of play around with it, you know what you're playing against, so you can play some different cards that adjust and modulate with the information that you know. So, a lot of these like higher value cards are going to be most beneficial against other control decks, for example, and that's just kind of the space that this sideboard can occupy.
To be completely frank, of the 3 decks I put forward, this is the one that I have the least confidence in as is. I have no doubt that this build could be further fine-tuned and whittled down into something that is even better than it currently is, but for the sake of Sazabi itself and just given how good that package is on its own, I am still quite confident that that is a deck that we will see putting up tournament results. And speaking of tournament results, it is time for the equivalent of Gundam Card Game royalty, a deck that we have been playing since GDO 1. There was a point in time, even if I think it's a contentious point, that this was considered one of, if not the best deck in the game. Riala, show us the updated green-white Endless Waltz Wing Gundam Zero.
It pains me to put this deck in this video because I spent so much time testing G-Team Preventer, with Sandrock, with our new White Amuro in the game, just thinking that would be the way to move this deck forward in the metagame. But of course, after some sad games and some gruesome losses, I then thought to myself, well, what if we just play old green white wing with a bunch of blockers and we slot in a couple extra heroes, and we slotted in 3 Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz, we slotted in 3 Death Scythe Hell to just deal with level 4 links in the game, so we don't really have to worry too much about having our blockers get 2 for 2'd basically, so we can keep those blockers around and make sure that they're there for actually saving us from shields when we do it. And this is the wing deck that tested the best out of all of them, so here we go. We have a wing deck that looks like many other previous wing decks with some added new inclusions. So this will probably be our shortest deck overview of the video, just because it's a lot of stuff that doesn't really require that much introduction. We're playing a split of flat and complant, just to differentiate between the 2-4 and 3-3 stat line, just because our stat lines that we're trying to pair into is a little bit more diversified in this format, just because, we're not thinking that we're going to be playing into a swarm of 2-1-2-2s all the time, so it's good to have 3 AP for one to be an EX base clear, and then also to pair into, the Rezells of the world and things like that. And then outside of that, this is the standard fare that you're used to. Ale Strike Gundam Kira creates tempo lead, allows you to swing an AP minus thing, good board control card. Wing Gundam, it's been here since the beginning. You breach 5, we target their level 4 lower unit with the link. We're still on the 4X green hero link, just to help Wing Gundam round out to that 7-7, because that stat line is still pretty relevant here. And then one thing that this deck is getting a very clear upgrade in is that we no longer have to sit in these late game Dirtle scenarios where we draw into a lot of pilots late game, or we just draw into a lot of low end blockers and we have a hard time, we have a struggle closing out the game. Because once you hit a critical mass of blockers and you're able to efficiently deal with things with the small tempo leads that we do get with things like Ale Strike Gundam and Wing Gundam, we can then move into a linked Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz, go ahead and hit them with suppression. Now all of our blockers have played their part on sitting there and waiting to be used as blockers, but if you have the clear equal, if you're at parity with your opponent or you're ahead of the opponent, then that's a clear time that you can start swinging all of these blockers sideways and then pair that with suppression to try to end the game a little bit faster. So I think that's like the clear thing that this deck gets when compared to the previous format, is that you get to have more definitive ways to end the game when you are at a favorable board position, as opposed to, still wanting to sit back and wait for the big Wing Gundam Zero to finally wrap up the game for you. You have a way to, kind of push the gas and do it a little bit faster. But, we're still in green Wing Gundam, so let's go ahead and just play 3 of Wing Gundam Zero in case it absolutely gets that bad and we need to kind of push the reset button on it.
Yeah, and of course, Wing Gundam Zero itself is still a clock on its own, because that high mode just means it continually clouds with shields. However, to your point, and I think that you are on the money in the fact that in that control scenario, it just gets a greater lock on the game, and that's the biggest benefit. The new hero also stacks with Kira, so you choose the target that you're going to Kira swing at. You have your linked Wing Gundam, choose your flavor here, hit shields, proc that hero effect, give that unit -2 AP, then you swing your Kira unit sideways at it, now it's -4 AP, you're taking a relatively free trade. If you're swinging Wing Gundam 0 in the Swalts, then you can even just force that unit to be rested so it's there just to be eaten.
Yep.
And I think that is a huge advantage. Like, once you have those units set up, you start kind of just shutting down your opponent's ability to come back into the game at all.
Right, and I want to give a special mention. I mentioned it very briefly earlier, but Gundam Scythe, man, this is a real card. 5 AP is absolutely scary. It can deal with a lot of even linked units in this game. And so, of course, having one card that can swing immediately for something that linked on the previous turn, you're trading one card for their 2 cards, and it probably evens out to 2 for 2 because their link card is probably eating one of your units in the process, but even still, this is an efficient way to deal with the opponent's linked units, where previously Wing Gundam decks had to kind of slam down a Wing or an Ale Strike to try to deal with those units otherwise. So just having a way to be a little bit more card efficient as well just helps you in your general positioning in the game, so you don't have to slam down those links early, and you can instead use those links for when they're very optimal to start pressuring shields with a Wing Gundam 0 and the Swalts or Stardeck, of course.
Yeah, a few things in this game feel better than death scything the Amuro linked RX-78.
I do want to talk about a new, bad matchup for this deck. Of course, the banning of 2/1/2/2s and blue-purple, kind of give you the false sense of security that, like, okay, well, aggro is, them sliding through and making sure that they can do enough damage to kill the blockers and go through and just swing through the shields. That's kind of gone. No, Phantom Pain is a deck in this game now, and this deck, like, really badly loses to Phantom Pain. The blocker hate in that deck makes your blockers kind of useless. The breach that still exists in that deck to kill through your blockers kind of sucks. Wing Gundam, we aren't like a control deck that plays for card advantage, so we don't have like a Show of Resolve or something like Strike Freedom, for example. So the cards that we get are the cards that we get. So even if we choose to discard a card, it's something that's kind of painful for us. So yeah, Phantom Pain is really, really good into this. Let's hope that the deck is not that popular, because yeah, it's a real bad matchup.
It's a bit of a Phantom Painful matchup.
Yeah, it's a bit of a Phantom Painful matchup for us.
And then, of course, something that we kind of noticed in testing, and it's just the unfortunate reality of playing blockers, and it's a little bit ironic. Other decks that you struggle into are other Kira decks and G-Team decks, because loading up your blockers with a bunch of negative AP kind of lets other decks just blow through them.
Yep. It's funny that the deck that I wanted to build out of this and then just settled on the Oldness is also, something that it's, weak to all the while, but, that's just how it is. Of course, there are some sideboard considerations here, mainly just to round out specifically what the opponent is doing. These are mainly more so just for responding to specific units. So, of course, Sword Strike Gundam can come back for the 1 Year Wars and whatever blue-purple aggro deck people are, cooking up with Gundam Extra Repair. Perfect Strike Gundam is interesting because it still operates a good stat line. And if you're scared of like Zeong, for example, and the 1 HP tokens that card creates, hey, it's still a Kira Link, it's still a decent blocker stat line. Being able to clean that up a little bit for you is pretty good, just because you don't want to worry about having to block those cards and the opponent just having a critical mass of dudes to, just kind of target your face and just be over it. The Char Zaku 2 token from that deck also creates, so like this Perfect Strike Gundam is basically like the 1 Year War hate card that you can put in your sideboard. Piecemealian, I think, is overall better than Underground Desert Base, but if you want to have a card that gets just played earlier, maybe played in conjunction with one of your early game blockers just to see a card a little bit faster, you can forego the healing that Piecemealian gives you for just earlier cycles. And then, of course, if blockers are still played in abundance in this format, that, people seem to be thinking blockers will be played quite a bit still in this format, there's nothing wrong with just putting in Shenlong Gundam or 2 or 3, or actually even 4 for that matter. So There you go.
Yeah, and by the same token, while the top end of the deck is pretty locked in, the potentially space could be made for an Ultron Gundam as well.
Yep. That definitely could be some room in the sideboard because, again, we have 10 slots to work with, so it's pretty sweet. So, in terms of my confidence, Wing Gundam is in an interesting spot because, last format, it wasn't in the best of positions. It was still something that was labeled as a competitive deck, but I think, Wing Gundam was definitely in its worst spot in the history of Gundam Card Game last format. These new additions put it in a pretty cozy spot in terms of just fitting into an overall game plan and being able to, again, push the gas with Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz and just make sure that more interaction is happening with your cards despite the overall play pattern still being the same. It's going to be real interesting where this shakes up, but yeah, the early testing has shown that this deck is up to snuff. If you're up against something like Sazabi, you can sack your low-cost blockers since you still have those 2-cost things on field. And then, while not the cleanest solution, we are worried about New Gundam. Gundam Wing can answer that, so if the opponent's going to be breaching you, you can go ahead and breach them back and then, kind of set the parity back. And of course, if you have a Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz to kind of follow that up, you can speed up the game to try to kill them even through something like New Gundam. But one thing I highlighted as well, in conjunction with Wing Gundam Zero Endless Waltz, your blockers can still swing. That's something that definitely creates a win scenario for your game. So just given the strong card quality and just added synergy that these new cards are providing for your deck and just better cases just to have answers to specific things, I'm feeling pretty good about this deck. But again, this is something that's hard to really test for in terms of a new meta just because we have a hard time knowing what's really going to be rising to the top in this format. But yeah, as overall deck concept, I feel like it's really solid and I'm feeling pretty confident in it.
Yeah, we'll see how it pans out. Obviously, across the board of what we've seen thus far, blockers play better, but I don't think either you or I would be surprised to watch the rest of G Team emerge and turn this into a more tempo-grabbing deck.
Yeah, it's very possible. Maybe I was just playing with the wrong set of 50 cards when I was playing with it and losing. With all the hype surrounding this booster's release, we're quite pleased with the cool ideas and deck archetypes Bandai has brought to the table with this booster.
As can be seen with the individual card evals and our thoughts on decks, something notable about this booster is that it hits way more than it misses. Almost every card feels good. We'll see going forward if the window of viability pares down over time, but for now, almost everything out of the booster seems baseline good.
Of course, since Bandai made changes to the ban list in this format, it is also nice to be in a blue ocean again when it comes to deck discussion and testing for viability. This is definitely a format all of us want to keep our eyes peeled on those pie charts, refining deck lists, attending locals, and doing everything to make sure that those deck lists are completely tuned. This is doubly true if a sort of sideboard implementation happens at some point this set.
It's wild that it's already been a year for the Gundam Card Game and our channel. We didn't make a big deal about it at the time because we wanted to wrap the anniversary of both the game and this channel together, but Riala and I are so thankful to you guys for lending us your time and attention.
Seriously, this game so far has been quite the treat. We appreciate all of your comments and support on our videos. Finding a community that cares about the game as much as we do helps further drive our love for this game.
We'll be cooking something up in the meantime, but next up for Gundam Card Game are starter decks 11 through 14 in September.
We hope you enjoyed these months of the GDO5 format. You can bet that we will. And with that, we'll see you next mission.